Good evening, everyone. We'll start now our planning meeting. Welcome, everyone, to the meeting this evening. Can I remind members, officers, and public speakers to ensure you speak clearly into the microphone so everyone can hear and turn them off when you have finished. We are now holding paperless meeting, and committee members and officers will be using laptops, tablets to access meeting papers. There will be a couple of hard copies in the galleries, so you can ask our officer there who is standing by the door. Please note that this meeting is being filmed and live and subsequent broadcast via Council internet site. Anyone who is interested but unable to attend will be able to see and hear what is going on in this meeting. It is particularly important for people to use microphone provided because contribution made will be otherwise not be recorded at all. By entering this chamber, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recording for webcasting and training purposes. I will now pass to the committee manager for House Rule.
Thank you, Chair. Just two brief announcements. First is for all members of the committee, officers present and members of the public in the gallery. We ask that you are welcome to use electronic mobile devices, but if you wish to make a call or receive a call, can you please step outside the chamber to do so? Secondly, we're not expecting a test fire drill today, so if you do hear a fire drill, it will be a real one, and we ask you just to follow officers who will direct you outside to the mustering point, which is Queen's Garden on Fell Road. Finally, I believe the committee will now introduce themselves. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll introduce myself. I am Councillor Humayun Kabir. I'll be chairing this meeting. But yeah.
Heather Cheeseborough, Director of Planning and Strategic Transport.
Councillor Joy Prince, Wadden Ward, Acting Vice Chair for this meeting.
Jason Perry, Councillor for Crome Ward.
Chris Wright, Coulton East.
Good evening, Jamie Audsley, Councillor in Benjamin Manor.
Evening, Councillor Patsy Cummings, Councillor for South Norwood.
Nicola Townsend, North Team Leader, Development Management.
Good evening, Richard Freeman, Deputy Team Leader, Development Management.
Louise Tucker, Planning Officer, Development Management.
Sorry. Good evening. I'm Councillor Bernadette Khan and I represent West Thornton Ward. Thank you.
Councillor Sue Winborn, Fairfield Ward.
Councillor Simon Brew, standing in as reserve for Councillor Luke Clancy of Coulsdon West, and I'm from Purley.
James Hayward, Committee Manager.
My name's Sean Murphy. I'm the Legal Advisor to the Committee.
Item number 1, apologies. I think we have one apology from Councillor Paul Scott, and Councillor Cummings is substituting Councillor Scott. And this is Councillor Cummings' first meeting, so welcome to Chamber and Planning meeting. Thank you.
And also Councillor Luke Clancy. Apologies.
Brew. Any others? No? Of interest, are there any disclosures member of the committee wish to make that's already not in the register? Anything new, or as it is?
A very small point to make. I live 200 yards from the site of the Old Lodge Lane planning application, which will be considered later in the meeting.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Business. There is none. Item number 5 is development presentation, and I invite Com Lacey and Simon Troplis to make your presentation. Also, there are Christian Kumi. Thank you. these three people will be speaking. You have 15 minutes to present to us, and then we'll have some Q&A, yeah, and we'll take it up from there.
Sorry, Chair. Could the case officer, Richard Freeman, just provide an update first before the presentation?
Yes.
Is that acceptable?
Yes.
Bearing in mind that been working with the applicant, and there's a number of things that he wishes to update committee about in terms of the report that was submitted. Obviously, it was written a week or so ago, and in addition, a verbal update from Place Review Panel today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Yes, the report was written about two weeks ago, so following the format of the last committee meeting as well, we'd like to just give an update on how the scheme has developed since then. The report sets out in the executive summary of issues a number of areas which are still being worked on. It is advised that the committee focus on those areas in their consideration of the scheme in front of them, or the emerging scheme in front of them. But since that report was written, the application, the scheme has developed, and the amount of family-sized units in the scheme has been increased 20% through the use of a 3-storey podium. The report sets out that whilst the policy is 40% in that area, given the type of development and its location adjacent to the district centre, officers consider 20% is an appropriate amount for family accommodation, and that's now been incorporated into the scheme. The report also sets out that there's further work to be done around the community use in the ground floor of the tower, and a lot of that work has been done, and you'll see that the community centre has been increased in size. That's something which the committee will want to think about, and think about how that works in the future and how that will be operated. That's still being explored with the applicant team, but the size of it has been enlarged, and it works better with the space surrounding it. And also the report sets out the consideration of the affordable housing. At the moment, the applicant is proposing to provide 50% of units, so half of all units, to be affordable housing, at a ratio within that affordable housing of 30% of those to be affordable rent or social rent, and 70% to be intermediate in the form of shared ownership. So that's the current proposal from the applicant. The report sets out that something different, which could also be provided in viability terms, but that's what the proposal is. There's still discussions going on around that to make sure that the scheme is viable and can deliver all of the public realm benefits, as well as that amount of affordable housing. Moving on to the Place Review Panel, it's customary for there to be a summary of that in the report. As that was today, we haven't been able to put that into the written report, but the scheme was considered by the Place Review Panel for a second time today. Following a site visit, the scheme had moved on since when the panel had previously seen it, and they felt that it represented a better coordinated proposal in terms of how the public realm worked in the local area. They had a detailed discussion about the impact on the conservation area, and the panel was relatively split around how the proposal sat within the conservation area and the special interest and historic nature of that. But it was generally the case that most of the panel felt that the scheme could bring a lot of positives to the area, and they accepted that in viability terms a certain amount of development needed to pay for those improvements to the local area, and they had some detailed discussions around materiality and how the proposal was in keeping with that. Just in the report itself, you'll see at section 7 at the rear of it that there's some specific feedback which we'd request from members, so just highlighting that to you, that really it is around how the proposal has an impact on the conservation area and the townscape, given its mass and how it sits between the existing buildings, and as you'll have explained to you, how the community use operates, the increased housing mix for family units, the affordable housing, the overall design and appearance, and how the public realm works, which is a major constituent component of the scheme, and how the highways and parking is incorporated into the scheme.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah.
We'll just do the lights before we start.
Okay, and I can see in my note there's Carter Jonas is also. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just by way of brief introduction to the scheme, this is one of several sites that Brick by Brick are bringing forward across the borough. And in common with all of those sites, this particular scheme has benefited greatly from input from the local community through several public consultation sessions, and also from planning officers and officers from the GLA. And we've made amendments, very significant amendments, which I think you've heard some of, following that feedback and following that consultation to make the scheme even better. It is a scheme that we think provides a huge amount of benefit locally, 102 units of housing, of which we're proposing 50% will be affordable, 20% family units, but also a huge amount of improvements to the surrounding estate. And within our proposal, we're suggesting improvements to the entrance, treatments to the existing towers, to the public realm in and around both the existing and new developments to create new semi-private gardens in and around the existing towers. About 100 square metre community space in the base of the tower, which is much needed in this particular location, and also significant benefits to the hard standing and routes to and through the site. So it's a scheme that we think really makes the most of the site and improves it both for people who will move into this new development, but also people who already live there. I'm going to hand over to Simon and the team here to take you through some of the architectural detail.
Thank you, Colm. Thank you, committee, for giving us the opportunity to present tonight. Up in front of you is the team who have worked on it. It's always good to thank everyone for their hard work. So it's HTA Design have worked on behalf of Brick by Brick. There's some other projects that we've worked on in Coulsdon on the screen in front of you there, including Canehill Park and several other schemes for Brick by Brick. We've been supported by Carter Jonas Mola, have helped us with the conservation work, and Lumina on the rights of light, both of which are, and the daylight and sunlight analysis, both of which are very important on this project. I'm sure you're all aware of the site, but just to put it in some context, our slideshow runs through the site location, the immediate context of the site, then looks at the conservation area, which is obviously a very important consideration, and then looks at how we might develop the site. A number of options were developed and considered, and then shows how our preferred option was developed. And then we have a series of views and architectural proposals to take you through. I note that we also have some models at the rear of the chamber by the screen there, which perhaps we could have a look at once I've concluded my presentation, if that's okay with everyone. So just to give you an overview of the site, I think probably you all know it well. It's immediately adjacent to the railway to the north of Norwood Junction, and running with the high street of the area, running just to the west of the site. To the south is Station Road, and to the north is Portland Road, and the site is accessed from Belgrave Road and Grosvenor Road off the high street. In terms of the arrival into the site, there's two main vehicular arrival points on Belgrave and Grosvenor Road. There's also a pedestrian route which runs along the east of the site adjacent to the railway, and they all form important parts of the access to the site. The towers themselves are both almost identical, so they have a slightly interesting impact on your perception of the space. In terms of orientating yourself, it's quite hard to orientate yourself because of their identical nature. The access to the towers is one of the things that we have looked to address working with the residents. It's fairly poor in that it's recessed, it has no visibility, you have to walk past existing windows to get there, and it's got limited visibility from the surrounding area. In terms of the conservation area, there are 6 zones identified, and we've done a lot of work with both officers and with Historic England to try and work through our impact on those, and I've got some slides further on showing the visibility of the proposals. But just to give you an overview of our interpretation, obviously the historic core itself, the high street, has a dense frontage that means that the development's actually not that visible from the existing towers, and proposed developments not that visible from that historic core. And some very notable buildings within that conservation area as well that we've tried to draw influence from. And perhaps the most important of those is the Stanley Halls area, with the very attractive bay windows that incorporates, and stonework there. And then it's also supported by some very attractive residential side streets, which we will have some limited visibility from. And again, we pick that up further into the slideshow. What makes South Norwood special is something we've really grappled with in developing our proposals. I think one of the most interesting features of it is the way that the historic landform has been retained. So you can see that here, the old alignment of Fog Island and Croydon Canal are still visible in the street pattern that we have today, and most of the historic grain from the 19th century is intact. Similarly, there's a lot of good local community uses, and that's another aspect of the conservation area that's commented on. And there's some lovely materiality and detailing, particularly around that historic core, that we're keen to pull into the site in our proposals. In terms of issues that face the conservation area, in terms of antisocial behaviour, the Belgrave and Groves in the site is the primary contributor to the antisocial behaviour in the area, so we feel there's an opportunity to address that with our proposals. But there's also the fact that in terms of those things which are rated as having an impact on this direct character, of the 4 buildings within the conservation area statement, the 2 of them are Belgrave and Grosvenor House. So some opportunity there perhaps to try and improve their relationship to the conservation area, we feel. In terms of looking at how we might then address those issues about the public realm and the impact that the existing buildings have, we looked at 3 different options. The first was a complete redevelopment of the site, which would have required the demolition and removal of the existing towers. The second was a low-rise infill around the towers, and the third was the proposal that's going to come before you today, which has got some low-rise and a high-rise element mixed to it. In terms of progressing those, we felt that the demolition option was not sustainable or viable. It would have had too much of an impact on the local community, but also it wasn't deliverable from a viability point of view. So we progressed initial options around option 2 and 3 there. The problems we found when we developed option 2 was the proximities we created to the existing blocks sort of undermined the qualities of light and daylight and sunlight within those buildings. So that was definitely something we were keen to avoid, and the overall impact was more negative than that which we found by creating a taller single block within it. Allowed us to create more open space within the site as well, being the other key element. In terms of the strategies that we developed from that, we then looked at how we could line that space by creating more frontage, creating proper streets which were removed when the towers were initially inserted. And then perhaps creating a building that sits at the confluence of the different pedestrian routes through the space, which could act as a community focus through the provision of a new facility, and also highlight the building on along the railway in terms of visibility and animate the pedestrian route that runs along the east of the site. The emerging design wraps all of those elements up into a public realm proposal that has a new open space adjacent to the bus stop and a new open space along the eastern pedestrian route that will serve the community facility. We have done 3 consultation events, as Colm highlighted. 325 properties were invited, and we had 61 attendants across those events. The majority were from Belgrave and Grosvenor House. Residents did raise concerns about the current situation. Antisocial behaviour, as noted earlier, was picked up, dog walking and security, fly tipping and refuse storage. There was issues around particularly around the open space, I think would be fair to say. And they welcomed some of the proposals that came forward, particularly the improvements to the security through new landscape proposals and the potential for a new entrance to their blocks. And this is the proposal for those entrances. So at the moment you can see that it's not very visible where you go into the buildings. It doesn't have much of an address, but also that it doesn't have much defence for the ground floor flat. In working that through, we think this is what that would look like. So you can see we've introduced new railings and hedges to the ground floor homes and a new portico entrance to those, which will make it much more comfortable arriving into the building and much clearer where the entrance is. In terms of those key components there, you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, the pedestrian movement we're trying to facilitate. So from the bus stop to the station, at the top, the vehicular movement through the site, allowing all of the vehicular routes to be well overlooked by buildings fronting those spaces, and then clear definition at the bottom of public and private open spaces with defensible space for all of the buildings. In terms of the open spaces, as I highlighted earlier, number one is the garden square, which will incorporate some play space, which I've got a further slide on. Number two is a space associated with that community use I outlined above. And then number three is new communal gardens for the two existing buildings. In terms of that new public garden, you can see here the proposal is to provide a open space with play area adjacent to the bus stop, but that will be screened by new planting along the boundary. In terms of the boundary treatment for the blocks, you can see the existing situation here well, so low crash barriers and nothing really between the street and the ground floor residents. We're proposing to introduce both railings and hedges into that, and new private space for those blocks that protects them from those areas of public realm. Another thing which we felt that made South Norwood special was its sense of community, and some of these slides just pick out some of those elements. In particular, we've referred to the We Love SE25 report that was published in May of this year, and that has influenced our creation of a community facility at the ground floor. As Colm noted earlier, that would be 100 square metres, and that would sit on this key public route from the station through the site and up to the bus stop that sits to the rear of the high street. So it will be very visible to members of the community, and there's a number of suggested uses that come out of that report at the bottom of the slides here. In terms of the massing of the building, that has emerged from that plan. We've located two blocks on the north and south of the site at 4 stories, and they relate very much to the context, and then a taller block that sits between the two existing towers that's been positioned to try and maximise their access to light. That block is then relates to the railway and also is subdivided into 3 different layers. There's a base that relates to the adjacent buildings within the context. There's a mid-storey which relates to the 11 stories, and then there's a top floor which relates to the city scale to the views up and down the railway. In terms of heights, that's been developed both through the viability but also through townscape studies. We chose a ratio of 1:3, which we feel gives us an elegant enough form to the building. And in terms of the important views from the conservation area, I just wanted to run through those now. I don't propose to dwell on them. We can perhaps come back if there's specific questions. What we've done is an analysis of what we call kinetic views, which run along each of the key views in the key streets within the conservation area. On this plan here, you can see the areas where the proposed towers will be visible, and the green areas where it's not visible. So in the bulk of the surrounding area, it's not visible, but there are a number of spots where it's visible, and I think that hopefully comes through in these slides. You can see for most of this set of slides, it's not very visible at all. On this view 4, you can see just a red line popping up there, and similarly in view 6, it just appears here. But then as we get to the junction of the High Street and Station Road, it's blocked out. Similarly, as we go around the other views, it's visible in some locations where there's lack of development, but as we move to the centre, it becomes hidden by built form, and then pops up again just as you get to the junction of the High Street and Portland Road. Similarly, with all these other views, it's hidden but just glimpsed in certain key locations. Normally with a view of the existing towers as shown here. So this is the view from Grosvenor Road, but in Belgrave Road it is also visible, and you can just make out how there's space around the building in that location. Conscious of time, I'll just move on to the architecture now. We looked at the organisation of all of the
less than a minute.
Yeah, buildings of note in the area, and we discerned a 6-metre bay, so we're going to run through some views that show that, and that informed our tower design and our design for the lower blocks. In terms of the high street context, we developed a design for the low blocks that very much picks up on their butterfly roofs. You can see that in there. Now I'll just run through the slideshow. So this is the entrance from Grosvenor Road. You can see the tower there. The bus stop, a view towards the base of the tower. a view looking back from the north of the site down towards the station, a view walking along that route, and then a view of the community centre at the ground floor of the building there, another view from the walkway, and then a view from the north coming down from Portland Road on the east-west route, and finally a view of the group of cluster of buildings and some of the lower blocks.
Thank you.
And then just to
Your
summarise...
time is over.
Yeah.
Thank you. Put the light on, please. Do you want to add anything now? Okay, that's fine. Q&A. Yeah. So now I open for Q&A, so please ask your question. Yes, Councillor Jamie.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for talking through the good approach to community consultation. Just wondered if you could outline any specific changes that kind of developed because of that. I know you mentioned some, but in the scheme and some of the concerns, but whether you could kind of, just give us a bit more detail about how that response was taken into account and what has happened because of it. Thank you.
I think a lot of the concern that was raised was around the specifics of the entrance, and we hadn't got that detail, so we've developed that, so that's much more clear. So the community wouldn't have seen what we've proposed this evening. Haven't seen the details that we proposed. We were proposing the idea of a new entrance, but we hadn't developed that when we went to them. The other elements that they were concerned about was the detail of the gardens. And then the third one was the impact that the development would have in terms of the position of the building. So at our earlier meetings with the residents, they saw a slightly wider, lower building, and as a consequence, we made it slimmer but taller. And I think that reflects the comments in those earlier sort of consultation events. I don't know if that sufficient to answer your question?
That's very helpful. And forgive my ignorance, maybe just one that comes to mind. In terms of the development, would anyone have to kind of move out of it? If I was living in one of the existing blocks, would I just keep living there while it all happens?
No. No, they wouldn't need to move out before the development that's taking place.
Thank you so much.
Councillor.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Could you kindly comment on what you've got in the way of disabled parking space, parking for cycles, and also for car clubs? Thank you.
In terms of disabled spaces, we're providing 3 disabled spaces with an opportunity for 7 additional spaces of wheelchair parking, that is. So that meets the 10% requirement. There is in the draft mayor's strategy proposal that this could be reduced where there's a justification for it. So what we've done is shown how we can meet that 10%, but we can accommodate the public realm around those where required. In terms of the cycle provision, that's all in line with policy. So that's at the ground floors of each of the buildings. There's a cycle store that accommodates the required level, which is based on the number of bed spaces. And then, sorry, what was your third point? I don't believe there is a car club space provided.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of quick questions. Thank you also from me for the detail of the presentation, given the short time you had. I was interested by the early comment. The place review panel, quote, was relatively split about something or other. What was one argument and what was the other argument, and which one won and why? That was question 1. Question 2, could you give us some example of the sort of uses that are planned for the community hub that you referred to earlier? And question 3, one of the tower blocks looks perilously close to one of the existing tower blocks. I'm wondering how much loss of sunlight there will be for the existing residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. If I could take the first one about the Place Review Panel. The Place Review Panel focused quite extensively on the massing of the proposal, its height and its location, and how that reactors to the conservation area, I suppose is the best way of putting it. So the special interest of the conservation area is primarily around it being a Victorian high street and the special character which that relates to, and the kind of information which you had taken through around the views and how visible the tower is in that context, and the fact that the existing towers have been identified as causing harm and how this proposal sits against that. And what they were split about, or the main parts of the debate, was how this proposal sits against that context and the benefits which the scheme can bring in terms of the public realm benefits, the more safe and secure routes across the site, the affordable housing and the family housing and all of those, and how those sat against the impact on the conservation area. They didn't, it's not like this committee where they come to a conclusion and take a vote. They all just gave their views effectively.
Just to add to that, then, I think it'd be fair to say three of the PRP said that they could see the logic of the taller building on the site for the benefits it could bring, and the fourth felt that she would have preferred to see low-rise development, but understood the viability problems that might have. So I think I felt there was a 3-to-1 sort of understanding, but that they felt that it needed to be sort of bringing the benefits that we're trying to propose here in their response. In terms of the community hub, the uses, I don't know, Com, if you want to come back on that, but there is, within our proposal here, we did just try and highlight those identified by the We Love SE25 group, so things like community shops and local produce. I think other things have been talked about, like after-school clubs and homework clubs, workshops and things like that. Do you want to?
I think that's right. The key issue with the community space is that it shouldn't be over-prescribed. It should be a flexible use that's able to be used by both people in the new development and people who already live around the development. So in terms of what we've proposed, and it has been significantly increased over the course of the last few weeks, we're proposing a large flexible use community space that can be used for the types of uses that the community wants to use it for.
And then in terms of the light levels, we've done a lot of work on that, and that the tower position has been really trying to optimise that. I think the important point to understand is that each of the towers, there's 4 homes within each of the towers on each floor, and they each have a corner window. So there's always one view which isn't impacted by the tower, if you like, where one is. So there's always a view that's maintained. So that's allowed the proposals to work, and officers have seen the detailed work we've done on that daylight and sunlight impact. So I think we've done a lot of work on it.
Okay. Councillor Prince.
Yes, thank you. 2 questions really. I didn't quite understand what you were saying with regard to the tower block about the 3 levels, referencing other. You're not proposing a stepped back tower, are you? So I didn't. If somebody could explain that.
Yep.
And then my second question is, there's just over 100 units here, aren't there, altogether? What's the rough split between the centre block and each of the lower, the tower block and each of the lower level blocks?
I've got it here. Oh, sorry, just bring that up for you. I can show you the detail there. So the tower is 65 homes. And the other 2 blocks are 37. And then in terms of the 3-level element, that's really the organisation of the building into a base element, which does kick out at the bottom slightly. So let's just see if we can find a slide that shows that. Well, you can see it, I think, a bit here. So this is the base, and that element incorporates the community centre and some larger family units at the lower level of the building. Then above that, the treatment of the tower up to the same height as the existing towers is single-storey bays. And then as we get to the top, we jump to a double-order bay. So when you see it from further away, the architecture is slightly different for that top element that is taller than the 2 existing towers. So it's just about the organisation of the building, but it does kick out a little at the bottom.
Councillor Perry, and then Councillor Cummins.
Thank you very much, Chairman. A couple of questions, a couple of points, really. The 5.2, it says that the site is underutilised and poorly maintained amenity space and parking. And I just wondered whether that was the council's view or whether that was actually residents' views, or whether residents actually look upon it as, you know, well-used amenity space for the blocks that are there already. And on the parking front, how many parking spaces are there currently on the site, and how many parking spaces will there be if this scheme were to go ahead? If you could answer those two, and then a couple more points.
In terms of the view of the residents, I would be very wary of speaking on their behalf. Certainly there was concerns about some of the impacts of the open space, the antisocial behaviour, the fly tipping. So I think that reflects a feeling of poor use of the open space, if that makes sense. But I don't recall a specific question of whether they felt the space was underutilised. Does that answer your question on that point?
Partly, but it doesn't really answer whether they feel they would then want to lose that space. So it kind of leads on to other questions, I think. But, okay, I just wanted to know what the residents' view was. It seems that there's concerns about antisocial behaviour, but did they actually want to see the space removed completely?
I think what I would say to that, Councillor, is that I think we improved the space significantly, so we don't remove the space completely. And a lot of the benefit of this scheme is improvements to the public realm areas that remain. The area that's taken up by the tower and the two low-rise elements is predominantly hard-standing parking area at the moment, rather than open public realm. In terms of your question on parking, there are currently 36 pay and display spaces which we are retaining, so the scheme proposes to keep those 36 pay and display spaces. There's quite a lot of undesignated spaces across the scheme, but as best as we can count it, in effect there are 44 resident spaces, of which there are 17 resident permits. So the remainder of those spaces do not have resident permits currently on it, and we're proposing to retain the number of spaces with resident permits. So we'll retain the 17 resident permit spaces. The remainder of what are currently car parking spaces in this proposal are taken up by other uses, which would either be new public realm, new areas of hard standing, or new areas of housing.
I didn't quite follow that. So there's 36 pay and display bays, and do they remain or do they go?
They remain.
They remain. Then there's 44 sort of additional spaces, of which 17 are parking permits, and just the 17 remain, and there's no further additional parking.
That's correct.
Okay. I think that's obviously an important issue, because I mean what you're looking at here, 100 new apartments. Looking at what was on this paperwork, I know it may have changed slightly, that's around 144 new bed spaces. So you're looking at 200, 250 extra people moving into this space if it was to go ahead. And the reality is that the parking will be reduced rather than increased. So you'll end up with less parking on site. And I think the loss of parking and the loss of green space, whether that green space be used appropriately at the moment, would concern me going forward. I think the two low-rise blocks seem to work quite well, but I think the main block seems very large for the site, and that in itself then knocks onto problems around parking. You know, you're reducing the level of parking for what's probably already quite a demand on parking, I would imagine, in the area. Then to add all these additional people in and reduce the parking and reduce the green space, I think potentially can lead to problems down the line. So I would just raise those as my concerns, and whether it's just putting too much stress on the existing community by adding all these people in and removing facilities effectively.
Sorry, just in response to that, the pay and display car parking is only between, I think it's 9 and 5:30. So after those hours, it would be available to existing local residents to park within. Also, as part of the application, we're proposing it's a car-free development, so that within Section 106, any residents that move into those blocks would not be able to apply for a parking permit.
Before I go to Councillor Cummins, can I just clarify how many minutes it takes to go to Norwood Junction from this site, and what is the PTL rate?
The site has a PTL rating of 5, and the site is within 100 metres of the train station.
Thank you. Councillor Cummins.
Thank you for your presentation. Just going back to the community space, and presumably you were in consultation at this sort of stage. Will you continue with that consultation? I noted that you said you don't want to have that overworked and overused, but will you still be in consultation with the local residents? Because I think with the We Love SE25 and a lot of things that's going around in our different communities with regards to the residents being involved in the community, and that could address things like antisocial behaviour, as long as they then continue to have that dialogue and can influence what happens in those spaces. So hopefully you will be able to continue that dialogue.
Absolutely. Our consultation and the dialogue that we have in these schemes starts, if you like, when we start to put a pen to paper in terms of drawing something, continues through construction and everything that's going to be involved in construction, and then continues afterwards in use as well. So in particular with regards to the community space, we need to continue consultations locally to find out what that space can best be, but equally around all of the rest of the elements of the scheme in terms of its build and it in operation, we'll continue to talk to the local community about that.
And obviously a lot of community groups that are doing a lot of good work, they haven't got very much money. Will there be the ability for them to be provided with the space at either reduced cost, or if they're actually doing something worthwhile in the community, that it would be looked at favourably for those groups?
I don't see why not. I suppose is the answer I give to that. We haven't looked in any way at how this space would be charged out, who runs it, who operates it, what are the commercial arrangements that sit behind it. We simply haven't got to that level of detail yet. I would imagine it to be a space that's affordable to local community groups to use.
About affordable housing, you are offering 50%, is it? I mean...
That's right, Chair. Yes, 50% affordable housing is what we're offering currently. That is split 70% shared ownership and 30% affordable rent or social rent.
Carry on from the Councillor Cummins' points. I have also a little bit of concern about community hub. After fittings and having toilets, reception and whatever you needed, how much net space will be for actual community? Because even a child's birthday party, for example, need, I think, a bit more space than I think is offered. So can you give your comments about that?
Let me just before you do, Simon. I think that this is one area that we've been able. One of the reasons for the very significant increase in the amount of community space is because we've been able to slightly change the structural arrangement of the building to be able to get a larger space, but also a space that can be more efficiently fit out for community type uses. So where we can fit the kitchen and toilet in a more efficient arrangement. So it is a larger space. It will be a more usable space as well. And I think Simon will give you the actual number now.
Yes. So there's 100 square metres you can see there, and actually the idea is that we can accommodate the facilities at the back here of the plan, and that should allow us to still get a very efficient larger space in this area here. So it's been designed with that subdivision in place. So I envisage we'd get 80 to 90 square metres of usable space from that 100 square metres, if that sounds about right.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you. As the scheme evolves, is it hoped to have more family units in the blocks? Is that the aim, or are we now locked into what we've got displayed on the screen?
In terms of the amount of family housing, we've worked quite hard to get that up to the levels that officers have discussed with us. It's obviously a very high PTAL rating site. I think we've had a discussion about the parking levels, so we felt it was more appropriate to focus on the 1 and 2 bedroom homes rather than family units. Com, I don't know if you want to.
Well, I suppose it's always a balance. What we have been able to do is improve this scheme over the course of the last few weeks by increasing the amount of affordable housing that we're offering and by increasing the amount of community benefit, both in terms of community space and external amenity improvements. To a certain extent, that needs to always come at a cost, and that's the balance of the scheme. And for us, we've been able to maximise the number of larger units to 20%. But I don't think we'd be able to increase that any further without injury to the rest of the scheme in some way, whether it be affordable numbers or improvements that we're enabling elsewhere.
Another point, Mr. Chairman, if I may. The amenity spaces around the blocks, you mentioned the 2 or 3 spaces. Are they actually going to be laid out as play areas for families, or are they just purely hangout areas?
The main space adjacent to the bus stop has a play area within that that would be suitable for families. There are small incidental areas of play within the private gardens for each of the blocks, so that would be suitable for incidental play. But the main play space is adjacent to the bus stop, so within this zone, sort of here on the screen.
So they are laid out play areas for children. Yeah, I see. Thank you.
Just looking at the digital print, it looks really nice. And after completion, will it be really like this on a sunny day? I hope it does. Yes, Councillor Cummins.
I think I'm entitled to ask questions that probably everybody else knows about. If this went through, how long would the development actually take? How much time would the existing residents in the other blocks, how long would their lives be disrupted?
If this were to gain planning consent towards the middle of next year, I think we'd be aiming on start on site towards the end of next year. I'd be very surprised if we were able to get through the full amount of development within 2 years or so. So I would estimate it to be 2 years of construction time. Yeah.
I have another small question about the cladding of the other existing buildings. I'm sure it will be fire regulated and all that, but will the work be finished at one go or before or after the new build? Or can you just give us some sequences?
So our scheme will be built in one go. There would be an amount, obviously, of construction sequencing to make sure that we can get everything that we need to get on and off site, but the scheme itself will be built in one go. We're not making any proposals to the cladding of the existing buildings, and in fact they are already rock wall cladding and therefore sufficient in terms of fire rating. What we are doing is making some improvements to the entrance treatments, and that will be done at the same time as the main construction works.
Any other questions? Okay. Could I ask Richard Freeman to points that all councillors made, and thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Chair. What I've got down in front of me is that the committee noted the importance of the public consultation exercises and that the scheme has responded to some of the issues raised and the importance of that coming out in the submission. There was a discussion of the operation of the community use and the importance of the community being involved in how that is brought forward in the future and in ongoing discussions, and the opportunity for that to be provided at a low cost. The impact on the residential amenity of the existing towers was discussed, and the dual aspect nature of the way that flats are sat in the corner of the existing towers was noted, so that the impact on daylight and sunlight would be reduced. The detailed design and the architecture and the emerging materiality of the buildings as well was noted in response to the conservation area, and how the 3 different levels of the tower responded to the different scales of the proposal. The importance of providing the public realm that responding to the local communities and the local residents of the existing towers and the local areas requirements and needs for private and communal areas, and the importance of actually providing this laid out as play areas was also noted, and the balance of the parking spaces to other uses in the area, and how losses of green space and parking space could be addressed in the emerging scheme. There was a discussion about the importance of parking reprovision given the public transport accessibility of the site, and for the community to be, the affordable housing offer was noted as well as being at 50%, and so a significant proportion of the scheme, and a desire for the community to still be involved in the emerging detailed design going forward. That's it.
Fair sum up? Yeah? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye. Yeah. Now, we have changed the order of our application serial tonight because a number of people are up there in considering that all of you doesn't need to wait that long. So we'll be doing 6.5 first, and 6.4, then 6.1, 2, and then 3. Okay, this is the order of tonight, so people don't have to wait unnecessarily in the gallery. Could I ask the officer to present 6.5, please, first?
Thank you, Chair. This item 6.5 is scheme 54 Arkwright Road for the demolition of the existing property and the erection of a 2-3-storey building with accommodation in the roof space, providing 7 flats. And that also includes vehicular access and 7 parking spaces with cycle and refuse storage. So this is the site outlined in red. And you can see Arkwright Road here, and then Moya Close to the rear, a cul-de-sac here. This is an aerial view of the site outlined in red, and then just to orientate, this is the opposite view from the OS map that you just saw. So you can just see Arkwright Road here, and then Moya Close to the rear at the back. As you can see, the residential character is generally made up of large detached properties, traditional but of mixed character and style. Land levels do slope upwards from north to south, and then also gently upwards from west to east. So that's from the road level up to the rear of the site. And then just to note, you can see, I don't know if the mouse is showing up, you can just see this property here, which is number 8, Moya Close. That does adjoin the site to the rear, but is sited some distance away from the building. So onto the site photos. This is the application site from the front, showing the existing dwelling. As you can see, there is an existing vehicular access and a parking area to the front. This is looking up Arkwright Road from outside the application site, so looking south, where you can see the variation in styles of the buildings along the road. And this also shows the land level change as you go up the road from north to south. So this is taken from the rear garden of the application site, looking towards number 52 Arkwright Road, which is a neighbouring property. As you can see, there is a garage along the boundary here within the neighbouring site, And this also shows the land level change between the two buildings. So number 52 is on a higher land level. And then this is from the same point, but looking in the opposite direction towards number 56 to the north, which, as you can see, is on a lower land level and set away from the boundary. So onto the plans then. This is a site plan which shows the proposed replacement building, and it's also useful to note that the dotted line you can just see on the plan shows the outline of the existing building. 7 flats are proposed as part of the scheme. These all meet the requirements of the National Space Standards, and there are adequate light and outlook provided to all rooms. All of the units are 2-bedroom flats, and there is one large 3-bedroom duplex unit with a rear garden, which would be suitable for family occupation. All units have an area of private amenity space, which is either a balcony or a private garden, or they have access to that communal garden at the back that you can see there. Coming on to the parking, the existing vehicular access to the site would be retained and improved to create adequate visibility space, so we consider that that is acceptable in terms of highway safety. This access point would serve a front parking area as is existing, providing 7 parking spaces. So this would equate to 1 parking space per unit, which is an acceptable level given the low public transport accessibility rating for this site. The layout of the parking area also allows for cars to manoeuvre and enter and exit in a forward gear, so that will retain the safety and efficiency of the highway. We would be securing a full landscaping scheme by planning condition, which will include planting to screen the parking area from the street scene. This would actually improve the appearance of the frontage, which is currently dominated by hardscape. Cycle and refuse storage has been provided, as you can see, just here in an integrated store, which is the preferred design approach for these items. So now, coming onto the elevations, as you can see, the scheme proposes a traditional design and material palette with a chalet-style roof and a bay feature at the front, and this would be in keeping with the street scene and the appearance of surrounding properties, and it's been designed to appear essentially as a large house. As you can see, it also works with the land level changes where the building heights step down as you come down Arkwright Road. And it's quite useful here. They've shown the dotted line of the existing building. So you can see it's not significantly larger in terms of massing than the existing building that's being removed. There is sufficient spacing, as you can see, to either side boundary to ensure there wouldn't be any harmful loss of light, outlook or privacy to neighbouring occupiers. And moving on to the rear elevation of the building at the top, so you can see how the building drops down to lower ground floor level at the back, and then that's the side elevation just at the bottom of your screen. And I'll just leave you with this slide to finish. The officer's recommendation for this item is to grant planning permission.
Thank you very much indeed for your presentation. Now I'll be taking some questions. Yeah, Councillor Wright.
Thanks, Chairman. In view of the notion in 3.4 about the surface water flood risk, could I suggest that perhaps we have a condition for permeable material to be used on that on the front, particularly on the front forecourt?
Yes, there is a condition requiring the submission of a SUDS assessment and also a drainage strategy to be submitted. We can also secure permeable paving to be used on the front of the site with the hardscape for the parking area.
Thank you.
Any other? Yes, Councillor.
Thank you for the presentation. Number 8 in one of the earlier plans is going to be, is that the residents going to be most affected by the development? Have you had any consultation, detailed consultation with the resident there and other residents, and what were the other objections, and how have you consulted with them?
We have carried out a public consultation, as is statutory requirement for the planning application. The representations are summarised in the report, so I believe they would have been sent a letter as an adjoining occupier. The property to the rear, that number 8, is over 30 metres away from the proposed building, so we consider that there wouldn't be a significant impact through loss of light, outlook or privacy, and that is sufficient to ensure we've got conditions to ensure soft landscaping would be provided along that boundary as well.
And were there any, what was the tenant of other objections from local residents? It's summarised in the report, but just it's not just the objections, but how you've addressed it with the people in the area.
When we undertake public consultation on an application, it is a public consultation exercise. So in this case, the application has been advertised and we've received those representations. It's not a case then that we then engage with each individual person as to how their comments have been considered or dealt with in the application. We receive their comments and we consider them, but there wouldn't have been any further interaction with those neighbours unless there have been telephone calls. So I don't think we can add any extra on that.
So they haven't come back to you?
So they've submitted letters of representation. We haven't gone back to them. That's something that we can't do. As you see, we've received 149 objections on this application alone, so it's not possible for us to interact with individual people. I'm not aware if the neighbours have come back specifically to the case officer, but if they've made a representation, it's been considered by the officer and it's detailed in your report.
Yes.
Just picking up on that, we get a lot of often we get a lot of objections, and officers have to consider whether they actually raise valid planning considerations. The valid planning considerations are therefore considered by officers and they are addressed in the report. In this particular one, there is also a number of not valid planning considerations, and that is also set out in the report. And it is the officer's role, the case officer, to weigh up the application and the various comments that come in terms of the sort of planning merits of the case, and then to make a decision or recommendation accordingly.
No? Okay, now I'll be inviting Mara Stewart Penrose, supported by Valerie Thurugru, to come and support her. And also George Nash, the agent, if he's here. Yeah, thank you. You have 3 minutes to tell your objection. So George also has 3 minutes. Yeah. Do you want us to time you, or you are going to self-manage?
I'm sure I will manage. To do it within 3 minutes. Thank you very much. My name is Mara Stewart Penrose. I am neighbour of the proposed development. I represent 149 and more residents who have objected to the development. While some of our objections were personal, the others were very professional and backed by professional knowledge and expertise. This objection have been submitted to the councillor by Steve Whiteside, and I hope that you have read this objection by the time this meeting is taking place. The planning officer report has totally dismissed our objection or made them subject to conditions, which in our opinion amounts to the same, where the officers make decisions behind the closed doors and then impose them upon us. The planning officer has made every attempt to justify her recommendation for this development, but in the process she has made a number of factual mistakes and misleading statements, which again have been addressed in Steve Whiteside's objection, which have been submitted to the Council and emailed to all councillors. We, the residents of the adjacent properties, are particularly concerned because we are told by the planning officers that our privacy and living condition will be protected by, from harm by conditions again. You know, the application does not demonstrate that there is any way of protecting the residents of adjacent properties. I would like to make some other points. Most considerations are left at the discretion of the planning or council officers. If this application is approved, the floodgates will be open for further developments in the area, which will turn the area into a concrete jungle at the detriment of the residents and the environment. The applicants have already contacted a number of other residents offering to purchase their property so that they can build some more flats in the road.
Time is over. 3 minutes has just gone, just finished. Now, I'm sorry, I have to stop you there. Thank you for your valid reasons. Now it's for George Nash.
Hi. Firstly, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank planning officers at the Council for engaging positively with the applicant throughout the pre-application process. Their advice has been very helpful in developing the design of the proposals that you see today. I don't want to go over the key points that were raised by the planning officer, but I do think it's worth perhaps just highlighting a couple of the key issues. On design, as I said, the design of the proposal has been carefully considered to retain the appearance of a single dwelling house and does follow extensive design pre-application discussions with officers. The building would be slightly larger than existing, but within the context of the wider area, which is made up of large detached dwellings in generous plots, it's not considered that this would be out of character or proportion. On standards, all of the units will provide satisfactory accommodation in line with minimum internal space standards as set out by the London Plan. 3 of the units would have access to private amenity space, 2 of the units would have access to balconies, and the remaining 2 would have access to landscape communal amenity space to the rear. Parking, again, 7 car parking spaces for 7 units, one on a one-to-one basis. And landscaping, the development will provide extensive areas of landscaping to the front and the rear. This will help ensure that the property stays in keeping with the street scene, and as mentioned by the planning officer, full details of this landscaping can be dealt with by condition. Flooding, again, the development will include extensive landscaping which will help to minimise runoff from the site. Otherwise, matters relating to drainage and flooding will be covered by building regs or can be dealt with by way of planning condition. I'd also like to highlight the number of benefits to the proposals. This obviously includes the delivery of 7 high-quality residential units, which will help meet the widely recognised demand for new housing in Croydon and London generally. Short-term local economic benefits during construction, the delivery of a well-designed building that's in keeping with the street scene, and the provision of an extensive landscaping scheme with concomitant biodiversity benefits. Just to come back on a couple of points raised by the lady to my left. On precedent, each planning case will be dealt with on individual merit. Flood risk, again, I said this will be dealt with by condition. I think some issues was raised with consultation. Again, it was dealt with through the statutory consultation during the planning process, but otherwise we have had extensive pre-application discussions with officers on the design and other elements of the scheme. And on the loss of privacy, we don't believe that the design of the scheme would be materially worse than high-level windows on a first-floor detached property, for example. I do note that obviously that there are some balcony areas to the rear, but these have been designed in such a way that the side views are limited, and as I say, would otherwise have the same sort of view as a rear window at first-floor level. I think that's everything from me, so thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your speeches. Yeah, now, no, sorry. It's a meeting in public, but not it's a public meeting. Do you want to add some? Yeah, thank you. Especially the misleading bit. I think you need to touch on that.
Thank you, Chair. Officers consider that this is a scheme that is in accordance with the MPPF, which, as you'll be aware, that we have there's a presumption in favour of sustainable development, and this proposal proposes 6 additional new units. One of them is a replacement family unit, and this is in accordance with government housing policy on the delivery of housing, and it makes efficient use of land. In terms of the concerns from the speakers about overlooking, it's a residential area, existing a residential area with very generous plots, and there are generous distance. Officers have looked carefully at the sort of overlooking distances, their generous distances to existing properties. The building is slightly deeper than the existing, but the plot is generous enough to accommodate this. And also officers have worked with the applicant in terms of ensuring that the proposals step down in respect to the topography and is respectful of existing ridgelines. So officers are quite comfortable in terms of the character and appearance of the development. It does look like a single detached house, even though it contains flats. So we're comfortable on the character side of it. The issues of overlooking has been addressed through the use of obscured glazing and also landscaping along boundaries. So we are satisfied that there will be no undue impact on surrounding residential properties. In terms of the objections that came in, officers consider all the objections right up until the point of determination or the recommendation. And we're satisfied with the information that has come in, and we consider the planning application on the merits and the application information that does come in. In terms of the final point, in respect of whether other residents who have surrounding properties may wish, if they have been contacted by a developer, to sell their own property. That is a private matter. In terms of how we work as a local planning authority, obviously, as the agent has raised, every application is considered on its merits. So we're comfortable that this addresses the issues of overlooking and is a good scheme with providing family housing as well as much-needed housing units. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now I'll open to the committee. Councillor Winborn and then Councillor Blue.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I am very concerned about this unit. I feel there's a lot of loss of light and privacy in respect of neighbouring properties. I see it being out of keeping and out of character. I'm concerned about the issues of flooding, and overall I feel it's an overdevelopment, and therefore, Mr. Chairman, I would like to move refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Brew.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered whether there are the objector raised the point that there are this is completely new type of development, that there aren't any other blocks or flats in Arkwright Road. I'd like to know whether that is in fact the case, that this is breaking a dam of having blocks of flats in Arkwright Road.
I'll just pick up on the issue of that. I mean, in terms of the issue of whether it's flats or not, what goes on inside the property is frankly not really relevant. It's what it looks like from the external, and the officers are happy that it looks like a single detached dwelling, so it's not out of character with the surrounding residential area. The fact that it's flats is not an issue in planning terms. In terms of whether there are other flatted development in the area, I'll ask officers to comment on that, but please do bear in mind that there is a need to provide more housing, and one of the key ways that that will be done is through, and not moving into the green belt, is through intensification of existing built-up areas.
Councillor Jamie and then Councillor Perry.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Firstly, I could say I know Councillor Dudley Mead was here tonight to speak on behalf of his residents, but I know he was unable to speak on a technicality, so just so that his residents know that he was here. I think the site, clearly it's a bungalow at the moment. I think it's a shame that we are losing lots of bungalows across the borough. They do service a particular need, and they do have value for many members of our population. So I think it's a shame that a bungalow, yet again, sort of faces the chop. I think the pictures that we saw showed the dropping land levels are very important, very crucial in this particular area, and that was very marked when we saw the back garden view of this particular site. And I think the impact on 56 next door and 8 Moyer close behind, I think is going to be very great. The development's moving much deeper into the site, which I think is a concern. I think the design in itself is okay, but I think the bulk and massing is the bigger issue. It's a much more dominant form of development. And I think the rear elevation that we were shown really emphasises the intensification of this particular site, and also the use of balconies at the rear, which again is going to impact on those behind, really does show the intensification and the impact for adjoining occupiers. So I think there is going to be a very large impact for adjoining occupiers, which I don't think is a price worth paying, and for that reason I would second refusal as moved by Councillor Wimborne.
Thank you. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. I think that this design is very good in terms of its outer appearance and how it would blend in with the other properties. I think it's also going to be providing much needed housing in our borough, and therefore I would move approval.
Thank you. Councillor Jamie.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to second approval.
Anybody else want to come? Councillor Brew.
Please, thank you. Picking up the point made by Ms Cheeseborough, I mean, whether or not there are flats in Arkwright Road may or may not be a planning consideration. She's much more of an expert than me, but the existence of a block of flats does itself constitute overdevelopment and therefore increases in aggregate the intensity of development. So I support my colleague Councillor Wimborne in moving to refuse this application.
Before I go for vote, anybody else want to come in or say anything? No? Okay. I have two motions here. First was completed. It was proposed by Councillor Sue Winborne and seconded by Councillor Perry. Yeah. The ground was...
on neighbouring properties and in development.
Thank you. Okay. Was proposed by Councillor Khan, seconded by Councillor Jamie Odsley. Okay, so we'll take the vote for the first one. Approval. For refusal. That was, first one, yes. So Councillor Sue Winborne proposed and Councillor Perry seconded it. So those for refusal. Yeah. Those against. I'm used to 5 against. Okay. So second motion, it was for approval. Please raise your hand for 4, 5. Those against? Right. 4 against. Okay. It's approved. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we go to 6.4 now. Yeah, thank you. Thank God. 6.4, could I ask the presenting officer to do your presentation? Thank you. Lodge Lane.
Good evening. The application before you this evening for 45 Old Lodge Lane is for alterations and erection of single-stroke two-storey side and rear extensions with accommodation in the roof space, and the proposal is to convert the extended building to form 5 flats together with associated landscaping, cycle, refuse and recycling storage together with off-street car parking. Before I start, I do have a verbal addendum for you. The applicant was due to speak this evening but has pulled out from doing so. They submitted an email earlier on in support of their application, but everything they raised in that email is already detailed in the officer's report, so there is nothing additional to add in that respect. So moving on to the presentation, you can see the application site located on the corner of Old Lodge Lane and Burcock Road. You can see it's outlined in red. I just hope you can see the mouse there. You can see it in this location here. It's important to note that the surrounding area is predominantly sort of detached and semi-detached houses, and you can see to the rear of the site there is number 1A, which was a dwelling erected in the 1970s as an infill development, but you can see from the OS plan that there are similar infill developments in the surrounding area. I'll show you that relationship in more detail as we go through the presentation. So moving on to the aerial view, you can see the application property here, just to give you a little bit more detail of the surrounding area. What isn't clear from this photograph, unfortunately, is that this Old Lodge Lane is effectively in a valley, and to the rear of the site, as you go up Burcock Road, the land levels increase quite significantly, quite quickly as you go up the road here, and you can see the pattern of development in the surrounding area. Old Lodge Lane, as you can see, it runs along the front of the site. There is a vehicular access existing at present, and there is an existing bus stop immediately outside the front of the site. So moving on to the application site, you can see here the application site from the road. As you can see at the front, it is screened by quite a decent-sized hedge. As you can see, the bus stop, which is located immediately outside the site here. We've now moved just into the driveway of the property, so you can see the drive, which leads down to a garage. That's a much more modern addition to the property. It's proposed that that garage would be demolished as part of the proposals, and you can see the existing hard surfacing to the front of the site. The photograph on the bottom right of your display shows the side of the property as from Burcock Road, and you can see these 2 trees here, which are both in the pavement. These are both classed as category B trees, so of quite good specimens of quite good sort of street presence. They would both be retained and not harmed by the development. So now moving a little bit further away, you can see our application site on the corner here and the road junction here. It is proposed to slightly widen the existing access to improve visibility displays, so there would be some loss of some of the hedging, but most would be retained. You can see there is quite a large tree on the front corner here. That is a cedar tree which is proposed to be removed as part of the development, but as you can see from the canopy, it is in quite a poor form, so our tree officers do not have a concern regarding the loss of that tree. However, it is proposed that 2 further trees will be proposed as part of the landscaping scheme, which can be secured by condition should members be minded to grant planning permission. The photograph at the top right is again taken further away up Burcock Road, so we're looking towards the back of the site, which is in this location here, and you can see the flank just of number 1A Burcock Road, which is the property immediately to the rear of our application site in this location here. Again, you can see that the land levels start to rise behind the site at Burcock Road, and then just at the bottom left we've got the flank elevation of the property from the road. So we're now going to move into the site just in a little bit more detail. So this top left photograph is taken from the drive down to the garage, which would be demolished. So one of the extensions would be located in this location here. The top right photograph is taken in the rear garden, looking back towards the application site. You can see the adjacent property at 43 just here. That property does have 2 dormers in the flank elevation here, but by the same token, the existing property also has a window in the flank elevation. So there is already a close relationship just there. And you can just see that relationship in a little bit more detail in the bottom right photograph. So you can see the dormers that I referred to just here and the relationship between the two properties. And then the bottom left photograph is taken with our back to the application property, looking back towards number 1A Burcott Road. And as you can see, that property doesn't have any windows at first floor level in its flank elevation. So now moving on to the proposed layout plan. It is proposed to slightly widen that existing entrance that I referred to earlier and provide car parking for 4 out of the 5 flats. It's proposed that the flats would comprise 1 one-bedroom, 3 two-bedroom and 1 three-bedroom flat. So that 3-bedroom flat provides a re-provision of family accommodation. That flat would be on the ground floor and would have access to a private area of garden. So both of the units on the ground floor would have access to an area of private garden, and then beyond that there will be a communal space provided. Bin stores and cycle storage would also be provided in this location towards the rear of the site, so not to dominate the front of the development. So moving on to the extensions, as I said, there will be side and rear extensions. So the extensions are in this location here to the side, wrapping round the back, and as you can see at the top here, the extension has been chamfered to ensure that there is a 45-degree sightline from the neighbouring property. However, as you'll have seen at ground floor level, there is quite a high boundary treatment between the two properties already, so the extension would be pretty much behind that fence at ground floor level. So these plans show you the elevations of the existing property. I thought it would be useful to show you so you can see the differences quite clearly. One thing to note is I did show you, as I referred to, there is an existing window facing the adjoining property at number 3, and you can see that flank window in the bottom right-hand drawing, and you can just see the form of the existing house, and I'll take you through on the next slide the proposed extensions. So the top left slide shows you the front of the property, and the extensions would be located to the right-hand element here. The roof would also be extended in this location here, and it's also proposed there will be a dormer extension on the left-hand side just here. So moving on to the rear of the property, you can see that the dormer extension would be in this location here. The roof extensions and the two-storey side extension would be just here, and then there is also a two-storey side extension, rear extension just here, which has an area of flat roof just here. As you can see, on the whole, the extension, the ridges and the angles of the ridge of the roof has tried to follow the ridges of the existing property to maintain that character. Whilst flat roofs are not prevalent in the area, all of the properties in the area have slightly different roof forms, so we don't believe that that would be particularly out of character or detrimental to the area. Moving on to the flanks, you can see the extent of the rear extensions, and it's important to show you in this location here. So that's that window that's facing number 43 just here. It is proposed that 2 windows would be proposed in the roof space fronting number 43, but the applicant has confirmed that both of those would be obscure glazed. And then this is the elevation at the bottom left, which would face Burcott Road. So you can see the main entrance to the property on the side there, and then the extensions, and that in this location here, and that element of flat roof extension just here. So again, at first floor level, the two-storey rear extension is set nearly 5 metres off the boundary with the adjoining occupiers at number 43 to maintain the impact on, so to ensure there isn't an impact on those adjoining occupiers, and the flats are laid out with another 2 on the first floor, and then there is a flat within the roof space. So finally, moving to the layout plan, so you can see the car parking spaces that I referred to at the front here. What's important is these trees that are highlighted in blue are the trees which will be protected and retained, and are particularly important in this development in the fact that they are category B trees, so they are of good quality. T1 just here will be removed, as will T2, a smaller tree here, and T10. But as I said, which is in this location here, that's to allow for the extension to be built. As I said, there is a landscaping condition proposed, and the applicant has confirmed that new tree planting would form part of that. The recommendation is for approval.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Any clarification? Yeah.
Chair, I just want to make a point of information that I live in Higher Drive, which is not close to the location, but I live in that locality. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Audsley.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know the area well, so just looking at the key reasons for recommendation, there's the comment that the principal development in this location is acceptable given the character of this part of Old Lodge Lane. So I just wondered if you could kind of maybe set the scene in terms of why this part as opposed to any other part.
Apologies. So there have been other flat developments allowed in Lodge Lane. I think what's important is probably going back to part of the conversation we had on the earlier applications. So the site before you, as you can see, is set well off its boundary at the moment, and there is space within the development site. The proposal is to maintain the existing dwelling and extend it and convert it to flats. Flats are residential in character, as are detached dwelling houses. So in terms of impact on character, the use of the development and the character of that occupation is very similar to a single-family dwelling house. Again, it's proposing a 3-bedroom dwelling to provide a replacement family accommodation. What I would say is there are a few flatted developments that have been approved within the area, but from my sighting on site, I mean, the adjacent property, from my understanding, is a care home, so at number 43. The majority of the properties are single-family dwellings, but that doesn't prevent a proposal for flats, and there have been some grants of planning permission for flats in Old Lodge Lane. I think one of the most recent ones was at 123, which is a little bit further down the road.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify something about car parking, please? I think it is the case that there is currently car parking at the front. As you drive in, you just stop there. But I'm just wondering how the garage fits in. I mean, the diagram shows the garage at almost a slight angle. I'm not quite clear what's going on there. Thank you.
Sorry, if I refer you to the photograph at the bottom left of the screen, I think it's clearer behind you with the lights on. So you can see the existing property has a driveway and a turning area to the front, and the garage is set back slightly behind the existing property. It's proposed that that garage would be demolished as part of the proposal, so there wouldn't be a garage provided, and there would be hard standing proposed to the front to accommodate 4 car parking spaces. So there would be 3 along the boundary here, and 1 in this location here, and then a suitable amount of turning space to ensure vehicles can enter the site and leave in a forward gear.
Anyone else? No. I'll invite the 3 objectors, Roy Sau and Pradanya Vaidya and Liz Marsden. Right. I don't know who's going to speak. Are you all speaking? 1 minute each. Okay. Shall we regulate here? Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay. And when you say stop, then you need to stop. The reason, otherwise the other person will lose out.
Okay. So, good evening. I deeply appreciate the immense pressure you are all under to build new homes for the people and families of Croydon. Turning 1 into 5 seems like magic, but as a local resident, I'm extremely concerned about the negative eroding effects this magic will have in our area and our community. I'm a friend and neighbour of the family making the application. I've loved seeing their 3 children playing on their bikes in the small garden of their lovely home. This is a high-quality, desirable family home in an area of family homes near schools where there is a shortage of available family homes. Let's support families and our community, and keep this beautiful family home as a family home for other families to enjoy. Thank you very much for listening.
That's great. Less than a minute. Thank you. You get extra. Next one. Yes. Okay. Can you Yeah, switch off your mic. Yeah, you.
Yeah. So,
who is speaking now?
yeah, I'll speak now.
Okay, yeah. So that's fine.
I'm from 1A Burcott Road, so I'll be immediately affected with that. So it will be a loss of privacy and increased noise level for us. And the refuse bins will be located at the back of 45, which becomes front of our property. And then we will experience stink during the summer months, as well as there will be an increased vermin activity. And as well as currently there are lots of cars parked on the Burcott Road, and then our view is obstructed when we merge out from our driveway. And currently the vans parked on Burcott Road have been broken into several times. So if there are more cars parked due to this development, then there will be increased antisocial activity as well in our area. And it will become very unsafe for us while merging out the property, because I have one child and I do the school pickup and drop-offs. And during the morning rush hours, it is very risky for us when we merge out from our property. And that problem will, it will increase with this new development. Thank you.
The third speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Many of us locally have extended our homes, but in keeping with the area. At number 50, plans were rejected for a similar flat development and later approved in favour of a new 6-bedroom family home. The plot at 45 will be overdeveloped, imposing and out of character with surrounding homes. The applicants provide direct references to similar properties located in Pamperswood Road and Foxley Lane, but these are busier and wider roads. The parking for 4 vehicles is completely inadequate. The overspill parking will be problematic at the Stugger Junction, where a cyclist was recently injured. Negative financial effect of surrounding properties is not a planning consideration. Yet by approving this, you'll be endorsing and embracing developments, encouraging homeowners alike, to put it bluntly, carve up dwellings for profit, making neighbourhoods less desirable. Our borough could easily focus on the derelict spaces to create new homes, thereby setting a positive example for other boroughs and the Mayor of London, without abolishing existing properties within our neighbourhoods.
Thank you. Just one time. Thank you. Our GLA member, Steve O'Connell. Thank you.
Yeah, speaking capacity as a councillor for Kenley. I think you heard tonight already the passion of the objections of the local residents. It is unique that we've had 3 insist on coming along to speak, and I think that gives you an idea of the strength of feeling locally with the other objectors who couldn't be here tonight. The point has been well made. I'd like to do some challenges around flats. Do not think that this is in character with that part of Old Lodge Lane. There are not flatted developments around the locality, and I would challenge back on that. It's been pointed out that that part of Old Lodge Lane is also difficult from a traffic management point of view. We have 3 schools along there, and I'm constantly getting casework about managing the traffic and the difficulties around that. The PTAL rating is very low there, so I don't believe that the parking is appropriate. To me, we're trying to cram too much in on a plot that is, as we've heard, a decent family-size home plot. That is in character, and I regret that we mustn't forget, that we mustn't lose touch with the concept of character of an area. What you're seeing up there is not in character with that area, and I think we need to really think closely about that. The development is close to neighbours. It is big. It's a very block element that we saw in that last, I don't like to look at myself, but in the last draft picture showed the size of it, the one before that, and it looks very, very big for that part of the area. I think we're really trying to squeeze a pint into a quart pot. We're losing trees, albeit 3 that aren't protected, so there's trees being lost, so the whole street scene will change. So from a decent-sized family home that we've heard about, you'll have a loss of trees, you won't have enough parking, you'll have more cars on the streets, which we've talked about, that are difficult, and a development that fundamentally is out of character. And I would ask colleagues to consider that, and hopefully look at refusing this application after listening to the emotional plea from my residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connell. Thank you very much for your speech. Say a few points. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Officers are very satisfied that the principle of development is acceptable. There's been discussion about the loss of a family dwelling. However, there will be a 3-bed, 5-person unit as part of this redevelopment, in addition to additional family units. So it's making a much more efficient use of the site and is not losing family accommodation. It is a generous plot, and the proposed extensions in terms of the character have been well worked through so that they respect the existing ridgeline. The dormers are immodest, and although there is a small bit of flat roof, it's a good solution that respects the building character. In terms of the discussions around flats not being in character, as I reiterate, the development retains the format and look of a detached single residence, so officers are perfectly satisfied that it's in keeping and in character with the area. What goes on in the building, the fact that it's being more intensively used, is not a relevant point of character as far as officers are concerned. In terms of the impact on neighbouring properties, we've considered that there are adequate distances from the neighbouring properties, with the rear extension well set off from the boundary to minimise the impact on the neighbours. In terms of the issues around highway safety, officers are happy with the highway's safety. The junction, although it has been identified as an accident black spot, I do draw your attention to the officer's report that collision records do not actually bear this out, and the proposed parking area allows for turning and exit in forward gear. In terms of there is a one-to-one provision of car parking spaces. In addition to that, although it is a PTAL of 2, the Reedham station is only 8 minutes walk away, and the bus 455 is in close proximity. There is, in addition, the ability to have some on-street car parking as well. So overall, officers are satisfied. This is a good use, further intensification of a plot, but it is well designed and is a good use of additional dwellings to address the housing shortage.
Thank you very much. Now I open to the committee. Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. This is really a great concern to me, and I know the area very well because I come past it almost every day, and I've seen it. And one of the characters of that area are its smallish dwelling places, three-bedroom houses, and that is a great benefit from it. The application that we have in front of us just virtually trebles that area, that dwelling, and we only have to look at it and look at the mass of that area and how it's been squeezed, how it's now going to be squeezed into a very small part, and you can always tell that an area and a development is not suitable for the site when you have opaque glass, opaque windows which have to be opaqued and have to be fixed shut, which is probably what these will be. Also the fact that you have to remove so many trees to try and squeeze that development in. That rings alarm bells to me immediately. And as I say, I know the site and I know what it can do. Overdevelopment of the site is obviously paramount. If you look at the site and look at the way in which it can develop, yes, there is probably a scope for a extension there, but this extension is miles too big. It just will not sit on that site adequately. And there are other points of view which Councillor O'Connell has mentioned, and that is, of course, is the road safety, which I know from my own experience, and also the PTAL of 2. It may be a reasonable distance from Reedham Station, which is not the best line for commuting into London, but also the 455 bus, which goes past the door, sounds ideal with a bus stop outside. But anyone who lives down there knows that the 455 bus is one of the most unreliable buses in the whole borough. And I've served 20 years on public transport liaison panel, and I know that well. Every meeting we have the 455 bus and its unreliability and its fact that it gets turned around. So to quote the 455 bus as being an answer to the development is just not true. So my objection to this, Mr. Chairman, is really that my great concern is the overdevelopment of this site, is inadequate facilities, and really I object to the design. To squeeze it in and put a flat roof makes the whole street scene wrong. It is wrong. So there's I propose refusal, Mr. Chairman, based on an overdevelopment and not out of character with the local area. Thank you.
Councillor Brew.
Thank you, Chair. My colleague has made most of the points that I was actually going to make, so congratulations, Chris, you were reading my mind. The one I would add is there are, in fact, as I understand it, only 4 parking spaces for the 5 flats, so it's not the case that there is one per dwelling. And secondly, one of the flats is a 3-bed, 5-person, and it's not impossible that there'll be more than one car there, and possibly for one of the others. So I think 1 to 3 cars are likely to be displaced from the current site to parking in the local roads. As I declared earlier, I live, it's actually 400 yards, not 200 yards from the site, but nonetheless close, and like Chris, I know the whole area extremely well, having lived there for 20-odd years. And it's accident statistics may not bear it out, but it is a very awkward dogleg junction just at this point, and I'm concerned that the extra cars being displaced onto the road when they park will not be good for the site. So I second Councillor Wright's proposal to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to propose approval. I think this is yet again going to provide much needed housing in our borough, and the design too is certainly not too out of step with the local area, and so therefore I'm proposing approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Audsley.
Thank you, Chair. Understanding of the concerns I've heard from local residents, and thank you for your comments. For me, the priority needs to sit with more housing, and for me, the concerns raised don't kind of outbalance that. So I'd like to second approval. Thank you.
So I've got 2 completed motions. First one is proposed by Councillor Wright and seconded by Councillor Brew for refusal. And the second one was proposed by Councillor Khan and supported by Councillor Audsley. So we'll take the vote for the first one, for the refusal. So those who are in favour of refusal. Those are in against. For refusal, for approval. First motion falls, so now I'll ask for those in favour for approval. Please raise your hand. Those against? 4 against. Is approved. Thank you. Now we go back to our original numbering. So first one will be now 6.1, the next one. Thank you. Ask the presenting officer, if you are ready, please, you can present your application. Thank you. It's land adjacent to West Hill.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the land adjacent to number 2 West Hill. It's for the erection of a 3/4-storey building comprising 9 3-bedroom flats with associated basement and cycle parking, with formation of vehicular access and the provision of refuse storage. So the first slide I have for you this evening shows you the aerial photograph of the area. So the application site is outlined approximately in red in this location here. So again, it's important to note there are land level changes across the site. So the land rises from the bottom of the site up West Hill and continues to rise up West Hill. The host property, which effectively donates the garden for this site, is number 2 just here. That is a detached house, but it has a planning consent for conversion to 4 flats, and it's proposed that 4 car parking spaces will be proposed for those flats. In addition to this, I will point out number 1, West Hill. This is a flatted development, I think, of 18 flats that was built in about 2013. And then on the opposite side of Stansted Road are, again, flats. However, these are on significantly a lower land level, so actually are not visible from Stansted Road. Then as you progress up West Hill, the character of the area is very much detached. Dwelling houses, and you can see there are large dwelling houses located adjacent to the site here, as we go up West Hill in here. So moving on to the photographs of the site, this is the view from West Hill of number 2. As you can see, it actually has effectively its flank to the road, and most of its windows face out towards our application site. And this photograph at the bottom right is taken just within the garden area, and you can just see here one of the trees which is subject to a tree preservation order. That tree would be retained as part of the application. So moving on to the area surrounding the site. So at the top left, we're effectively stood with our back to the site, looking up West Hill. So you can see the detached properties which are immediately adjacent on the opposite side of the road to number 1 West Hill, and how the road rises and the dwellings continue up the road. On the right-hand side, you can see we're stood effectively on the opposite side of the road to the application site, and we're looking down towards the junction with Sanderstead Road just here. And then the photograph in the middle at the bottom shows the flats on the opposite side of the road. Just to give you an idea of the change in land levels, the photograph on the left is actually taken in Sanderstead Road, so you can just see West Hill curving off to the left, and the application site would be on the right. And then here you can see Sanderstead Road just here on the lower land level. It's important to note the proposed vehicular access to the site would be off West Hill in approximately this location here. The photograph on the bottom right is again taken in Sanderstead Road, and I'm afraid the sun there makes it a little bit difficult, but the junction with West Hill is just in this location here. And as you can see, the tree screening and the change in land levels means that those flats on the opposite side of the road are not visible in this context. So we've now moved into the application site, and you can see that the area which forms the application site, previously the garden of the host dwelling, which you can just see in this location here, steps down and it has a change in land levels as it comes down the hill. So we're looking across the garden here, and that's just the corner of number 2 there. As you can see, there's quite a lot of trees and hedging between this site and the adjoining occupier. Again, we've just turned around here, and you can see, looking down the site, you can see the change in land levels continues. This tree here is actually within the adjacent property at number, bear with me, 255 Sanderstead Road, and the scheme has been designed to ensure that it steps away from that tree so that it can be retained and not harmed as part of the development. And now we've just turned around, so we're looking back up the site at the bottom right, so you can see the change in land levels in more detail, and the bottom photograph looks across the bottom of the site at its widest point. So moving on to the OS plan showing the development in place, so you can see the host property in this location just here. As I said earlier, most of its windows are actually in this elevation, sort of facing towards the application site, but as you can see, a good distance will be maintained between the flank of our proposed block of flats and that dwelling to ensure that it's got a good standard of amenity and space retained, so in this location here. You can see that the building actually steps forward, so as the site steps round the corner and gets to a wider point, the development actually steps forward, so it's in 3 sections to provide more texture and interest to that development and to respond to the site's shape. You can see that the new vehicular access would come in this location here, and that takes advantage of the land levels to enable a basement to be provided, so that 9 car parking spaces can be provided in the basement for the 9 proposed 3-bedroom flats. As you'll see from the report, a number of trees would be removed from the development, although a landscaping condition is proposed to enable new planting to be replaced. But there are a number of trees on the site which are subject to a tree preservation order, and all of those trees would be maintained, and there is a condition proposing tree protection measures during construction to ensure that they are not damaged. So moving on to the site and its relationship with the host property and the land levels. At the top of the development, top of your slide, you can see the proposal at number 2 West Hill, just here. And you can see the maximum height of that dwelling. There have been some concerns raised in the representations about the height of the proposal. From the cross-section and the drawing below, you can see that the proposed development would not be any higher than that existing height of number 2 West Hill, and then it proposes to step down the hill and follow the contours of the land. Also noted on this drawing, in this dotted line just here, is the outline of the height of the flatted development at number 1 on the opposite side of the road. So going down to the bottom, you can just see at the bottom right, the entrance to the car park is denoted just here. So the development is taking advantage of those change in land levels in order to get the access to the car park. And the development is in 3 sections effectively, and the furthest one, the top one is set further back, and the next 2 start to step forward to provide that interest and depth to the elevation. So in a little bit more detail, you can see the layout of the fenestration and the details of the 3 blocks. And those blocks would be proposed, the materiality is a sort of a mixed buff stock facing brickwork. And what is important on this development, which doesn't come through in this drawing, is the projections of the 3 different sections, and also what will be important will be the depth of the reveals around the windows to provide that shading and context and texture to the elevation. So this would be the elevation facing on to West Hill. This would be the rear elevation facing towards that property at 255. As I said earlier, there is quite a lot of shrubbery between the 2 boundaries, but all of the windows in this rear elevation would either serve sort of communal hallways or bedrooms, so would have a reasonable relationship with that property. And at the bottom right-hand side, you can just see an indication of the type of brickwork which is being proposed by the applicant. So this elevation, you can see the 3 stepping elements as they come forward in these locations here. And this elevation is the elevation which would face towards Sanderstead Road, and there's been an introduction of windows within this elevation to ensure that the building also has a front and faces Sanderstead Road, so it doesn't turn its back away from that frontage. And this is the elevation facing towards the host property number 2, so more limited windows, but as I said, there is a reasonable separation distance between the 2 buildings to ensure that the amenities of the existing and future occupiers is protected. So this drawing is proposed to just give you a little bit more detail about that texture and the projecting bays as they come down the hill. So you can see that this is the development which is set furthest back. The middle one steps forward slightly, and the lowest of the units, the lowest of the elements steps forward the most, and you can see that entrance to the vehicular access there. Because of the positioning of the pedestrian entrance, that would be a level access to ensure that there is access for those with disabilities or with pushchairs and prams. And also what's important to note from this drawing is all of the units are served by balconies, so they would all have access to private amenity space together with the communal landscaped area around the building. So moving on just to the last drawing, which shows you the trees which are proposed to be retained and the access and that landscaping plan. And then on the top right, you can see here in a bit more detail those staggers to the building and those steps forwards and how the balconies interact. The recommendation, Chair, is for approval.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. Question. Yes, Mr. Councillor Chris Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. In view of the fact we're losing 16 trees, is it possible to include in the landscaping condition specification for percentage of trees to replace some of those 16?
We wouldn't normally include a percentage, because what's important to ensure that where new trees are planted is appropriate not only for the development but that they have a chance to thrive in that location. I think certainly we can include in a recommendation hard and soft landscaping condition is that details to be submitted, and that's what we propose, but we could include something to say include new tree planting, so that it's not just shrub planting that comes forward, new tree planting also comes forward if members were minded to grant planning permission.
Laperi?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Has there been any discussion with the applicant around highway sort of improvements to go along with this scheme? As we saw in the pictures, it's a very, very tight, dangerous junction there.
So as part of this application, we have consulted the Council's Highways team in relation to the proposed development, and we have had quite a lot of discussions with the developer about the proposed location for the vehicular access. So at one point early on, it was proposed to put it out onto Sanderstead Road, which our officers quite rightly advised was inappropriate and would not be correct to do so. Our highways officers are satisfied that in this location the access would not harm highway safety. What's important to note that because it's on effectively the outside of the bend, anybody leaving that vehicular access exit would have a full view up the road of anything coming down and of that anything entering from the junction. In relation to proposing any mitigation measures for the access onto Sanderstead Road, as you'll be aware, it's only appropriate for us to seek contributions or improvements outside the site where the harm of the scheme requires it to do so. In this case, our highways officers are satisfied that the entrance in this location would not cause harm to the highway, and therefore there is no justification as officers for us to seek a financial contribution or for highway improvements outside of the application site.
Okay. Any further question? Councillor.
Thank you again. I also want to come to this point about the access to the site. It seems to me to turn left out of the site, you're bound to go across to the other side of the road. It's such an awkward angle, particularly if you obey the rule of the road within the site. Say you're on the left-hand side of the access road as you come out. You're going to have to do a 90.
As I said, our highways officers have looked at this in detail and have not raised any concerns in terms of highway safety. In this location, as traffic on West Hill is approaching or leaving the junction, speeds should be quite low. So if you're coming down the hill, you know that you're turning to a junction, and if you're just coming up the hill, you're only just setting off effectively uphill, so speeds would be low. Our highways officers have looked at this and believe that it complies with all the relevant standards and that there isn't harm to highway safety as a result of this exit.
I had one more. It wasn't clear to me whether there was a single front door or 3 front doors or whatever for the 3 blocks of flats. I couldn't see any front doors at all.
I think this slide is the most helpful to us. So effectively, one communal core entrance, if I can find the mouse, is proposed in this location just here, which would then go into a communal core which serves all 3 blocks. Absolutely. And as I said, because of the change in land levels on West Hill, it's been determined that that is the most appropriate place for that pedestrian access because it enables a level pedestrian access from the pavement.
Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you. Now I invite Ian Kumba, the applicant's agent. You have 3 minutes, and once you are settled, do you want to regulate us or you are self-regulating?
Sorry? The time, I think I probably only need 2 minutes. Okay, thank you, Chair. Well, members, this is a case that has been ongoing through the pre-application process at the Council and finally lodged as an application following numerous amendments suggested by your officers, and in particular the design officer, the transport team and tree specialists have engaged fully in the process prior to the application being lodged. The recommendation to grant planning permission is testament to this process and for the many hours of hard work from your officers and the applicant's team. The site is heavily constrained by topography and trees, and earlier schemes have been eroded down to take account of these constraints to present a contemporary design solution that fits in with its surroundings. The scheme steps down the hill, retains many trees, and in fact augments existing planting to provide a pleasant wooded setting for the new development. This particular product is marketed towards local residents looking to downsize and hence will do its part to free up larger family housing whilst at the same time accommodate new families. Acutely aware of the parking issues flagged by neighbours, the scheme curtails itself to provide only 9 new homes, which includes off-street parking. Issues flagged in the consultation are set out at the bottom of page 24 and the report on the next page. In terms of transport, your report accepts the close proximity to Sanderstead and Purley Oak stations and the 403 bus route. 1 parking space per unit is provided, along with 2 cycle spaces per unit. These are accessed from the new entrance, being a location preferred by your transport team as it provides ample visibility, as we heard in the officer presentation. At a strategic level, members will be aware that it is precisely Winfield schemes such as this, incrementally, that provide much of the borough's new housing stock. It is also fair to say that, as a small builder, the applicant intends to deliver this housing as soon as possible following, I hope, your decision to endorse the very robust recommendation to grant planning permission. In conclusion, I agree with your officers. The principle of development is acceptable and the design demonstrates the immense amount of work between the applicant and the design team, and this new housing scheme will not harm residential amenities of the wider neighbourhood in which it sits. Furthermore, living standards of new residents, the parking provision, tree protection measures, new landscaping, along with control of flooding, have all been considered in depth over a period of around 12 months. It's a good scheme and I believe worthy of your support in endorsing your officer recommendation to grant planning permission. Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well in time. Now I'll ask Heather, do you want to come in?
Chair, I've got no further comments. Thank you.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This scheme, in many ways, is to be welcomed. I mean, many times at this committee, I've spoken about flatted developments that do not allow for downsizing. And I think this particular scheme, as has just been said, very much is aimed at downsizing, which means that people living locally can move to these types of property and thereby freeing up family homes that can then be reused, etc. So I think there's definitely a market for this type of property, and I think to have a scheme with 9 3-bed units is to be welcomed in that respect. This particular site is a very large garden. There's going to be some loss of ecology, which is obviously regrettable, and there are difficult highway issues with the access to West Hill at this particular point. So I think it's a shame that there's no addressing of those issues around West Hill. I think some of the process that has been followed through, I think the access to parking and also the pedestrian access, I think use the land levels well. But I think the overall design and the contemporary approach really does not fit well with the local area. It's predominantly sort of turn of the century, 1920s, 30s houses in the area, and this contemporary approach does not, for me, sit well with that. Also, when you look at Sanderstead Road still very much has the feel of a country lane. At this particular point, it's very narrow at this particular point, and I think this block will look very dominant in its current form on Sanderstead Road itself. So, for me, the design is really the biggest issue. I don't think this particular design works here. So I'm going to move that we defer this item for further design work that would make this particular scheme more in keeping with the surrounding area. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jamie Oldsley.
Thank you, Chair. While the design doesn't kind of blow me away, I think it's acceptable and it fits well. It brings good accommodation to our borough, and I'd like to move approval.
Councillor Wright and then Councillor Khan.
Chairman, I think Councillor Perry has made a very good point about the design. It is a very difficult corner, a very difficult junction there, and anyone who knows it well will appreciate that. And you have to get the right design in the right place, operated in the correct manner, if you understand what I'm going to. And I don't think this does it. So I think a reassessment of the design to suit the site is desirable. So I second the proposal for deferment.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to second approval.
Okay. One for deferral and the second one for approval. I'll go to take the vote for the deferral first. So for those who support the deferral, please raise your hand. Okay. Those against the deferral? Okay. 5 against. Thank you. Go for the approval of the project, which is proposed by Councillor A. Oldsley and seconded by Councillor Khan. Those for approval, please raise your hand. 5. Those against? Okay, it's approved. Thank you. Thank you very much. We move to number 6.2. Councillor Chaudhary has joined us. Thank you very much. I think you would. It's okay. So you can join us. You can start participating from 6.2. Thank you. Yeah, please present. I'll ask officer to present 6.2, Earl of Eldon, the pub, 63 Brighton Road.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening again, members. So the proposal before you is for a development of a block of flats to the rear of the Earl of Eldon, which is at 63 Brighton Road, which is the corner of Brighton Road and Upland Road. The description could possibly be misleading. Just to make absolutely clear, the pub, which is a locally listed building, is not to be demolished. That would be retained and would continue to be used as a pub. A very small extension to its side stroke rear would be partially demolished and partially altered, but the proposal effectively is in the area to the rear of the pub, and which is a garden and car park. So we've got Brighton Road and Upland Road. This is the pub here. As I say, it's locally listed because of its historic special interest, and the area, I believe it used to be a coaching house. The area to the rear here is a garden, and then this is an area of car parking. The area, as I'm sure you'll all be familiar with, is generally residential in character, and you can see that there are semi-detached and terrace properties set back at this building line further along the road. But it's worth noting this light industrial unit and employment generating use, which is a car MOT and repair station, which is this shed effectively here, which is also part of this use there, and that really separates this proposal from residential units over here. There are some flats or ancillary residential above the units facing Brighton Road, which tend to be commercial on the ground floor. This is the site, so that's the Earl of Eldon pub, and the proposal would be in the car park, which you can see to the right here. The wall, that's the extension which is to be altered, is this one effectively. It would come slightly further over and operate as a bin and a bike store, and for ancillary storage in association with the pub. And there's a small extension just to the rear here, which would be demolished. And the proposal would sit here. This boundary wall is actually of relative historic interest, and so in this location here, it would be retained. It would be cut down to a lower level so that there'd be windows in the building in front of it, and planting integrated into that. But effectively, in historic interest and fabric terms, the proposal would not have a negative impact. The employment generating use which I referred to is this one here. Whilst it's single storey, the roof is pitched such that at its highest point here, I hope you can make out from the photographs, it's over 1.5 and bordering on 2 stories in height. So the 3-storey building would be significantly screened from the side by that building there. There we go, that's it in slightly more detail. And this slide is looking down towards the junction of Brighton Road, so the application site is over here. And just worth pointing out this building here, which is a converted and extended building, which is flats, which is right on the back of the pavement. So you walk down the pavement here and you're right next to those windows. This proposal is set slightly back, so there's an opportunity for defensible planting, so it doesn't have that relationship, but it's worth noting how some of the buildings in the area are. So here we go, this is the proposal. It's 3 stories. The 3rd floor is set back. It went through some design iterations, some amended plans whilst we were processing the application, and there was a pre-application inquiry before then. The proposal, as it was maybe originally thought through, we felt conflicted with the locally listed historic pub, was too tall effectively, and the design and intricacy of it really almost competed with it. So it's now very much a calmed down proposal. It's quite modern. It's quite sleek, really. The setback of the 3rd floor really means that as you look down the street, you'd still be able to see a lot of the gable end of the pub, which is and the chimney pots, and it would still be a historic building at the end of the road. This is that extension which I referred to, which gets altered slightly. There's a main entrance, and units are laid out so that there are 2 units per floor, which effectively run front to back. The ground floor units have amenity space to the rear, but firstly I'll just show you these elevations in a bit more detail. So effectively a brick construction with 1st floor balconies for these units, and then there's a terrace for each unit here. It is a very simple elevational design, and its success will be in the quality of those materials and how some of the patterning and detail comes through, and the recessing of the windows and those balcony areas to provide a bit of relief and articulation to the facades. Those are the side elevation on the left and the rear, but the side elevation, it's worth noting, would be significantly screened by that light industrial use. So here's the layout. That's the extension which we've been talking about, generally a bike store. Bin stores, the area here. As I said, communal entrance, 2 units, 1 to the left-hand side, 1 to the right-hand side, bedroom at the front with this defensible planting in front of it, and then an amenity area to the rear, and then the layout is effectively the same on the upper floors, but recessed at the top floor. There's some conditions recommended so that the full details of how this area operates between the pub and the residential, so that both of those users can be serviced from that area, which officers are satisfied can happen. Many thanks. The recommendation is for approval.
Could I just ask, the ground floor, 2nd floor has got 54 square meter, yeah?
Yeah.
What is the how many meters on the 3rd floor, which is a bit setback?
Yeah, yes, that's right. The setback floor area is lower. It's coming in at 39, which is the 1-bed, 1-person size, so it still meets the nationally described space standards.
Thank you. I probably wasn't listening enough, but I'll still ask. The thing which might look like a garage, kind of triangle shape at the end, what was that, sorry?
Yeah, it's the garage.
Okay.
It's a car repairs and MOT centre, so yeah, an employment generating geese. It runs down the side into the rear.
And is that existing kind of thing, or is it part of a...
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So that's that.
So, yeah, just look quite out of character linked to this.
Right.
Anyway, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right.
Councillor Perry, and then Councillor Chaudhry.
How many parking spaces will be lost and how many will be provided, please?
It's not formally laid out, but you could get between 4 or maybe up to 5 or 6, depending on how much you want to cram them in. I would say 4 would be an easy to manoeuvre layout, but they aren't formally laid out. No parking spaces are proposed, or all of those would be lost. It is an area with a public transport accessibility level of 5, which is good. the units are small units, and so don't give themselves to family accommodation, and so are maybe slightly less likely to the occupiers to have a car. So given the PTAL, its proximity to local services, officers are satisfied that a car-free development is appropriate.
Thank you, Chair. I think, well, my question has been answered about the car park, that's why I wanted to know. Is this total, this side of this picture, it was for car park, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's worth stressing that that's car parking associated with the pub. So,
Okay.
yeah, the extent to which those uses are compatible is maybe for you to consider.
Okay.
Councillor Winborn.
Could you tell me if the outside amenity space is only for the ground floor flats?
Yes, maybe I slightly rushed over that. I beg your pardon. So the ground floor, which you can hopefully see on the screen behind me, the amenity space. Oh yeah, thank you. So each ground floor unit has a small rear garden area, which is there, and then the upper floors have a balcony at the front. So, if I can find the mouse, excuse me. But effectively, where you can see the couple standing, that is a balcony cut out for each unit on the first floor. So they have private amenity space provided as balconies. And then the upper floor is a setback terrace, so there's a terrace in front of it.
Any other questions? No? Okay. We don't have any speaker, so we'll open to the committee. Councillor Perry.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I know this road very well. It's in my ward. There's a very strong community in Junction Road, very strong family-orientated community. Parking is a huge problem in Junction Road already. So this scheme has the potential, one, it's pushing the parking from the pub into the road, but also those moving into this scheme, the parking for that would be pushed into the road. I think it's an over-intensification of what is a small road. It's a small road, it's a very busy road. Vehicles speed through here all hours of day and night, and parking and highways issues are a big problem for local residents. And I think really, I can't stress the family community here more. To put 6 one-bed units here is not meeting the need, it's not fitting in with the existing social character of the area. And what you could have put here is a pair of semi-detached houses that would provide family housing in a family community that would actually help to alleviate the need for housing that we have in this borough. 6 one-bed units is just a cheap way to put a building on the site, make some money for a developer, and not actually help the local community whatsoever. This scheme is not the right scheme for this site. I move refusal as an over-intensification of this site and the impact on parking and local residents.
Thank you. Councillor Chaudhry.
Thank you, Chair. I think, this sort of semi-pocket, I can say, for single people or maybe double. And especially I'm concerned about the parking, but again, I'm not concerned because most of the areas is single yellow line. And single people, mostly they don't have much car about, in this area. And I think it's a nice, because it's a residential area, so also we need some lot of single people to live there as well, which they have, because if they don't have proper accommodation, it's very hard to do job and all these things. So I think it's a nice development for, small units, which is, I approve for recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to make an observation that I think it would have been an opportunity if the design, the outer exterior design, could have more reflected and picked up on some of the design features of the pub, because it stands out in the way that it stands out. Although I'm not ruling it out, but I do think that the designers the architects could have picked up on some of the theme of the pub building and not made it so very different. But as I say, I'm not ruling it out. In fact, Chair, I think I would suggest supporting approval. Yeah.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. But Councillor Khan and Councillor Perry hit it on the head in two respects. A, it is a wrong development in that particular site and that particular area of the borough. It's just not providing any use whatsoever. But also to echo what Councillor Khan says, I mean, if we're going to have a development on a site, let's have it looking a bit better. And as Councillor Khan was quite right, I said, picking up the details from the pub instead of having just a bland bit of brick built down, just provide some inadequate dwellings that are not well, dwellers that I believe are inadequate in my opinion, that do nothing for the community and nothing for the area. So I would second Councillor Perry's refusal.
I've got two motions. First one is for approval. Sorry, I apologize.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think as I've listened, clearly this is a development site, but I do think on design and indeed the type of type of accommodation proposed that we could do better. So I will be not supporting this proposal. Thank you.
Before I put to the vote? Yeah, ground for refusal from Mr. Councillor Perry you mentioned was intensification.
Overdevelopment of the site and impact on parking.
Impact on parking, thank you.
Let's make a point. I'm not suggesting it's inadequate accommodation. I'm simply talking about. Yes, yes. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Right. Yes?
Does the committee want officers to respond on any of the points which are made around design and parking? I don't know.
In terms of housing, my understanding is, and perhaps you could confirm this, it does actually meet all the relevant space standards.
Obviously, in design, everyone has their own choices. My personal choice is it doesn't look like a pub, so that's good. So I know some features from the pub. So those people who like to live in a house, they will feel that they're living in a house. So it depends, individual choice. Question is it one-bedroom house? That's what Councillor Chaudhry focused on, and that's what he proposed. Anyway, so I'm going for vote. So first was proposed by Councillor Chaudhry, seconded by Councillor Khan. So please raise your hand for approval, those who support. Those against? 5. Okay, that brings me to use my casting vote. Yeah, I'm going to support it. So that's my vote. Thank you. In my view, it is approved. Yeah, I give my casting vote. Do I need to add anything? No. Okay, fine, thank you. Now we move to 6.3. Thank you. Presenting officer to present 6.3 rear of 21 Beachway.
Thank you very much. So this application's at the rear of 21 Beachway in Selsdon. The proposal is for the description you can see in front of you, 7 large family dwellings. It's fair to describe this almost as a second phase of an earlier development, although, as will be made clear from the presentation, that's not actually what it is. But you can see on the slide in front of you, Boxford Close, which is the cul-de-sac which is coming down from the north, and you've got Beachway over to the east, and you've got Old Farley Road, which these two roads come off away to your northeast to orientate you. Outlined in blue here is a previously approved and implemented scheme. So the planning history of this site is quite important and is set out in the report in front of you. So the approved scheme there was for large detached units and has been implemented on site. It was for 8 units off this spine road, and then another application was submitted to add this unit onto it in the future. Following that, we've also approved a scheme reference 1605852 in your application papers for development on this site, which was as 4 detached houses, and you've now got an application in front of you for 3 detached houses and 4 semi-detached houses. I think the important things to point out on this site plan are that, as you'll see in a moment from the photographs, the levels fall quite significantly from Beachway down in this direction to the west. The report references the presence of important trees on the site protected by a TPO. There's 2 TPOs. There's a more recent 2015 tree protection order, and then there's a 1970s area tree protection order. Area tree protection orders aren't really used anymore because they tend to protect everything within the area, including those which are not of merit. So those within the 2015 TPO are limited to this area here, were retained in the previous consent and would be retained in this consent as well. The majority of, well, the high quality trees in the wider area, which are covered by the area protection order, are still retained. So they're mainly located along this boundary here. And as you can see, they are retained, and there's a gap so that they can be retained. It's probably also fair to say that the form and generally the spacing of these units is pretty similar to what's previously been implemented. This slide shows the outline of the site in red, and in the thick green boundary and everything to the south and east of that is the Metropolitan Greenbelt. So that is the boundary of the Greenbelt. It's right on the boundary of the Greenbelt, and as you all know, there is a presumption against inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, so it is very unlikely that there would be future development there. And I think the other thing to say on this as well is, as you can see, over time, there have been developments of cul-de-sacs in the area of infill developments. So this photograph is taken from effectively this point here, looking at the development which has been implemented in here. So the site falls significantly away to the west. That's the main spine road leaning down there, and the development would be in this area here. Those were the 2015 protected trees. I'm not quite sure what I've pressed, but hopefully I can... there we go. Yes. Yes, so those are the trees which are protected by the more recent tree protection order, and the scheme would be beyond it. Again, that just gives you an example of the levels. There's a separation distance of approximately 18 to 20 metres from the rear elevations of these properties here to the front elevations of the proposed properties over here. This photograph shows you the relationship with what is actually the host property on Beach Way, because this is all in the garden of that. And as you can see, this photograph is taken from approximately the edge of the site, and there would be a very good separation distance of over 30 metres to the rear elevation of that property. And both these photographs are looking down their garden, and effectively the development proposal would be in this area here. And this shows you the relationship with the buildings which have been implemented. So this is approximately from slightly further back than the front elevation of the proposed buildings. And here we've got a photograph taken from number 19 Abercorn Close on your left, looking towards the application site. And it's quite difficult to make out, but on the right-hand image, you've got number 19 visible here. Number 19 is an infill bungalow, when everything else in the area is generally 2 stories, and is just located here. Moving on to the proposal, I think I'll probably start with a relationship with number 19. So this is the proposed development at the bottom of the slide here. Number 19 is located here, and because of the angle... yes, I beg your pardon. This is the previous consent. I beg your pardon. This was what was previously consented as 4 detached properties. As you'll see in a moment from the other slide, the buildings are effectively in the same place with a very similar separation, and so it's a very similar relationship to all the other neighbouring properties. So that's what's been approved, and that's what's being proposed. So the relationship to number 19 is very similar, and due to the angle and the level changes and the opportunities for landscaping and screening, that relationship is considered acceptable, and this relationship is considered acceptable due to the separation distances, and as I said, the host property is located off the slide up here, some distance away. So in conclusion, the proposal is is a second consent on the same site for 3 detached 4-bed units and 4 semi-detached 4-bed units, and is recommended for approval.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. Questions? Yes, sorry. Councillor Prince.
Yes, just briefly, can you confirm, because it seems to be the case, but can you confirm that the design of these buildings are going to be very similar to what's there in Boxford Close already?
Yes, absolutely. So this scheme here, this shows you the proposed development on the bottom. So it's very similar, 2-storey, pitch roofs, making use of front gables, which are characteristic of the area. What you can probably, hopefully, just make out on that is the red outlines, which is the outlines of the mass of the previously approved buildings. So whilst things do move around a little bit, they effectively have a very similar mass and scale as what was previously approved.
Thank you, Chair. Just, I was interested, just from an interest really, is it the same developer as the ones that are next door?
Well, what's happened is that since the previous part being delivered, effectively another person has said that they are willing to sell their garden, and so this has come along. So if you're kind of thinking about splitting sites and things like that, I'm not sure if that's where you're going with that. We've considered that, and we are satisfied that it wasn't that there was always a scheme to bring forward both sites. One came forward and got delivered, and then another opportunity came up. So it's not that a site which could have been a major application supported affordable housing was split into 2. We're satisfied on that.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. In 6.3, I think there's issues that were raised by the representatives about a prehistoric archaeological site. Is this a fact, or, I mean, has there been an archaeological survey done, etc.?
There hasn't been an archaeological survey done, so we require archaeological surveys based on the presence or absence of the site being within an archaeological priority zone, which is an area designated by Historic England as being likely to have remains in it, and indeed the Historic Environmental Record, which is a record of all the archaeological significance in the area, and this site does not fall within any of those.
But don't you think it's perhaps a good idea to explore that possibility? I mean, local residents obviously know the site and know the history better than you or I or any members of this board. So is it done any harm to have an archaeological look at it to make sure that we're not destroying something forever?
Yeah, we checked records, and there is no suggestion of anything there. It's for this, I suppose, it's for this committee to decide if how they want to deal with that.
Audrey?
Sorry, I didn't go through everything of the paper. Is this a parking space in front of the house? How many is? And the second question is about the waste collection. Is this the big vehicle can go in or to collect? Please, can you clarify?
Yes, hopefully you can see on the slide now on the screen each property. So these are the semi-detached properties, and they have 2 parking spaces on drives at the front for each property. So effectively, all the properties have 2 parking spaces to their fronts. A waste vehicle can track through this part of the site, and so therefore, when you take into account the reversing distance which they're allowed to do, the entire site can be adequately serviced by a waste vehicle.
I believe there is no speaker, yeah? Okay, I open to the committee.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I mean, okay, well, I was not saying a great deal anyway. All I was saying was that there's very little, of course, we can do with the approval already given to virtually a very similar site. It just seems to me it's a shame that we've just let greed creep in, and that's what all we've done is delay it so that greed can creep in and the developer can make more money out of it. I think that's a shame, but there we are. I think perhaps there's one or two things we ought to look at more closely, and that is the nature conservation area. Although it doesn't abut the site, as it says in the, it will have an impact on the development in that area, and I think we should have perhaps more ecological surveys done than that. But apart from that, there's no reason to refuse it, and I propose approval, Mr. Chairman. With perhaps archaeological condition or informative or something.
Case Officer Richard, if you could just pick up on the ecological aspect. My understanding, a quick scan through it, was that it wasn't an issue, but Richard, if you could just pick up on that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So, I think the 2 points have already been made. This is a garden, currently is a garden, which is mainly an expanse of lawn to a relatively significant degree of maintenance. That's not actually a species-rich habitat. The trees and hedgerows, there is slightly more likelihood of there being some species within those, but those are mainly retained, as you can see from the image in front of you. So officers are satisfied that overall the impact on ecology wouldn't be significant, and there's no suggestion that there are protected species on the site. There is a relatively significant amount of landscaping retained as part of this proposal, and there are opportunities for that landscaping to be increased as well. And paragraph 8.3, I believe it is, of the report sets out the provisions specifically with regards to trees and the retention of most of the trees. 8.8, I beg your pardon, and those are likely to be where, if there are any species of interest, they would be in. So that's part one of the answer. Officers are satisfied that there is unlikely to be a significant impact on, definitely on any protected species and overall on biodiversity as a whole, especially when considering the landscaping scheme. Part two is that, as has been said, a very similar scheme has been approved on the site already, and the difference between the two schemes, I would argue, would be exceptionally minimal, and that isn't something which was considered necessary at the time. If I can just talk very quickly about the site of nature conservation importance, it does lie quite a significant distance beyond the boundary of the site. Maybe if I just move back to this drawing doesn't show the boundary of the site of nature conservation importance, but it effectively is on the other side of Beach Way. I've lost the mouse again, I beg your pardon. So it's on the other side of Beach Way over here in this location, and it's all the way over here as well. So it doesn't immediately abut it. There is green belts to the south, but this wouldn't, in officers' opinion, significantly impact on nature conservation.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I was a little bit concerned about the ecological damage, but I think officer assured it will be, it will be no problem. It is, been checked through everything. So hopefully, because it's really important for our nature, of course. But I think it's really nice to see some of the property already been developed nearby, And we need a lot of, family house, which is really important because, and I think it's a nice sideways green areas as well. So it's good to develop at least 4-bedroom house, which is a lot of people need for Croydon. So in that aspect, I moved for approval for recommendation of the officers. Thank you.
Okay, you asked the question.
In the earlier application, was an archaeological survey undertaken?
No, it wasn't. No.
And why not?
The same answer as previously. It doesn't fall within an archaeological priority zone, and there's nothing in the historic environment record which triggers the need for it.
Yes, but we would not know what natural life, what had occurred or is occurring there in the original application. Is that not standard procedure?
Just to be clear, we're talking about an archaeological survey. Yes, okay. Yeah, no, every development does not have an archaeological survey carried out with it. In the same way as, for example, flooding is only in areas which are considered likely to be flooded because of modelling as to how it's been done. Certain areas, based on historic evidence in terms of the historic written record of where developments have previously been, things like that, are known to be in areas where there might be significant archaeology, these archaeological priority zones. And outside of that, there isn't a need for there to be an archaeological survey.
What about natural habitation there?
Yes, so similarly, I suppose, it is a matter for case officers to use their professional judgment on as to whether or not there needs to be surveys of natural wildlife, and Natural England publishes a set of guidelines about when they are required, and it's all about what's currently there on site and what's near to the site around it to see whether or not it's likely to support any protected species. So if, for example, there was a pond, especially a pond which is often seasonal and dry and wet at different points, that would be a habitat which might be likely to support newts, and so therefore you would require there to be a survey to see whether or not there are newts on site and the extent to which the proposal would have an impact on them. This is, to all intents and purposes, a rather large garden, and gardens, whilst they do indeed support natural life in terms of hedgehogs and birds and things like that, they aren't a species-rich habitat from the perspective of protected species, and the scheme does have a significant amount of landscaping and soft areas still retained within it, and so therefore the impact overall on nature conservation isn't thought to be significant.
Thank you. Sorry to bang on about the archaeological history, but if we've got at least one resident saying something is on site, surely this should be investigated. I have a planning application that I'm currently dealing with in my own ward, and I saw an objector sent an email to Historic England, I think it was, is this site of any interest? And it only took 10 days to get the response, no, it isn't, as far as that other site was concerned. Surely it's worth either conditioning or something to make sure that whatever issue the resident is making is genuine and not, we're not barking up the wrong tree.
So the process which you just described, where someone wrote to Historic England and said, is there an interest here? We effectively have done it in a different way. We have access to Historic England's mapping of where they think it's likely that there are archaeological significant. That's what an archaeological priority area is. So they publicly available, actually, they designate areas as being likely to have archaeological interest in them, and we have access to that. And so effectively, what you described has happened by a different mode. So maybe I could have made that clearer, I beg your pardon.
Councillor Prince.
Yes, in a way, I just wanted to clarify. Presumably, if this is not approved, the developer could implement the permitted scheme. So I think, Councillor Wright mentioned earlier on that we have very little wriggle room here tonight. It seems to me, looking at the diagrams, that, I mean, what we have actually is a switch from 4 5-bedroom properties to 7 4-bedroom properties, which are smaller. It looks as though the sort of built footprint is going to be much of a muchness across the site. I think it is regrettable, actually, that we're not going to get the larger family houses, because we do need, you know, not all families can be accommodated in three bedrooms. These are 4, which is better than most. To some extent, I regret the loss of 5-bedroom houses, but I really think, you know, we have no grounds to turn this down, and I think I too would be supporting approval.
So my understanding is Councillor Wright has, you have moved up for approval, yeah?
Approval with the archaeological condition, yeah.
Yeah, but obviously explain about archaeological reason why it was not done. And I think we have moved on from there, isn't it? Because the nearest plot, it wasn't done. So I'd just like to get your view on, can you just clarify whether Mr. Councillor Wright is asking about archaeological, yeah, you want to put a condition. Is it too late? Is it possible? Is it worth it? Is it?
So, if officers do not consider it's necessary, for the reasons we've set out, it's clearly for the committee to take any decision they consider is right, which could include that or not. But officers have been through a robust process on this and do not believe that it's necessary, and indeed isn't on the previous consent. So, as the point has been made, that could be implemented.
I'll ask Sean to give the clarification.
Chair, I think whilst it's correct, obviously, that as Richard Freeman has just indicated, if the members move something with a condition attached, that's fine. It would just need to be confirmed that that's also how the person who seconded wants to second it with that condition attached. So it'd just be worth getting that clarity.
Thank you. Thank you. So, who was the seconder over there? Was it
Councillor Chowdhury?
Chowdhury? Yeah. Do you want to?
Yes, I can include this to attach as a condition. Yeah, seconded. I mean.
All right.
And then, in addition to that, then it might just be worth clarifying: is that despite the officer's advice that it isn't necessary in this instance?
Chair. Yeah. I just want to check. I mean, in terms of conditions, I mean, they have to be enforceable. There has to be a reason behind them. And I'm just wanting confirmation from yourselves that you'd be happy to put such a thing on, bearing in mind that the applicant could appeal the condition. I think members need to be aware of that, because...
yes, the condition could be appealed, the previous scheme could be implemented. Those are things which the committee needs to take into consideration. If I may, I'd suggest that if this were to go forward with a condition, it could be what is actually Historic England's standard condition wording, whereby firstly a desktop assessment is undertaken. So that's reading historic already existing records of whether or not there's anything in the area before you actually go out there and dig some trenches and find out whether or not there's anything there. So that could be a proportionate response to the fact that clearly this committee is debating whether or not there is an issue here.
Councillor Khan?
Yes, well, I think that I would be happy with that, Chair, rather than none at all done. Thank you.
Repeat that again, please.
What I'm saying is that I would be more confident, let's say, if that desktop process was actually gone through and it was confirmed with us, because I really don't like to be supporting something that I don't have clarity of information about. Thank you.
So then it's just worth asking Councillor Wright, I think, to confirm if he's happy to follow the suggestion from Richard Freeman, and if he is, also is Councillor Chowdhury happy to second that?
My recommendation it stands. I mean, I recommended approval with the condition of architectural survey. But I think it's quite simple to me.
Okay, so we'll go for the, if anybody want to come in anymore, no? We'll go for the vote. So approving it with text of archaeological survey. Okay? Those in favor, please raise your hand.
9 in favor.
Is this against? 1? Okay, any abstention or that's it? That's it? Okay. Thank you very much. It's ended very nicely with the last one. Can I just wish everyone, officers and committee members, a very happy Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. I think this is the last planning meeting on this side of this Christmas. So that's great news. So have a break, yeah, and come back fresh on the beginning of the year. Thank you.
Doesn't the chair buy everyone a pint, Councillor? That's the last planning committee.
Welcome to Costa Coffee, yeah? Because you love Costa Coffee.